No Jumper, coolest podcast in the world. And today, I should probably just lay this out for the fans who are just clicking this and are kind of confused about who I'm talking to.
Yes, let's do that.
An up-and-coming trend on YouTube is sort of like podcast commentary. And somehow I have become a near daily viewer of the man across from me, who I've never met in real life until moments ago. Because you do daily, in-depth criticism and commentary about various podcasts, but primarily the Joe Budden podcast universe. So I introduced to everybody Danny from the Stub.
Yes, hello to the No Jumper verse. I'm happy to be here. I like to say I live on the intersection of content creation and hating. So I want to give you something, Adam.
Okay.
Joe Budden's first album.
Wow.
And
this is legendary. It wouldn't be that legendary if it wasn't coming from you. That makes it more legendary.
So I bought that when I was a child, and I thought he would be the next Hove. I was telling my friends that, and if you look at his first 3 singles, it was pretty big. He still had a great rap career, but I'm just saying I wanted to give that to you. And now I have my glasses on. These are my science glasses. I got my science pad. And we're going to do the science today, Adam.
I like how you do the science because I feel like there's a lot of science not being done in the podcast commentary space. A lot of narratives being spun. A lot of times when I even try to have an in-depth conversation about something that happened, it's hard to get people to want to indulge in the facts beyond the very superficial narratives. It's almost like the Instagram headlines have sort of replaced any sort of in-depth thought sometimes. So every time you say, we need to do the science, I see that as you actually having a commitment to perhaps going back to a podcast from 6 months ago and reviewing it to make sure that you're peeping the energy between certain hosts, et cetera. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think it's always good to look back at things in hindsight. Like people say hindsight's 20/20, but to actually reflect that in content is very powerful. And you can kind of see things that people were saying weren't true at the time. Like I know you've been through that, right? Where people will say, oh, this is not about this. And then you go back and look and you're like, no, that's exactly what happened. So that's why I like deep dives. And I think all of you guys probably will have books written about you years from now. So I was like, let me be the guy that can kind of be the person that people go to about that time.
But so, okay, give me a little bit of your early life that leads up to you buying this CD, this godforsaken CD, and then ending up in this position.
Yeah, it's not a bad album. But so I was born in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. That's where I grew up, kind of before everything popped off over there. The South Side, Los Sudes, as they call it.
Between Biggie and hipsterdom.
Yeah, between Biggie and hipsterdom. Really, Hove is, Jay-Z is closer to where I lived than Biggie was.
Okay.
Marcy's son. And it was kind of like I was a radiohead. Like I was listening to all types of radio. Like I would skip class to listen to Star and Buck Wild. And I would listen to DJ Clue. I would record tapes. I would be listening to the Hot 97 morning show. So then when podcasting came around, it was like, it's perfect for me. It's long form. People are really diving deep. And it was before podcasting had kind of become the second coming of radio, right? Now it feels like very commercialized to me. But so yeah, so that's when I started to study media out in Long Island at SUNY Westbury. And I had become the college program director of my radio station and the music director. Yeah. And I had a radio show, a TV show, and that was where the science was birthed. Yeah.
Really interesting. So that you know, one thing that Benzino said to me the other day when we were talking about why hip hop never really took off from Boston, he blamed it on the fact that the radio stations were very, very corporate, didn't even embrace rap at all until very late, and never really worked with any like underground or like smaller artists at all. And he felt like that kind of held Boston back. But when I think about my time with the radio in Boston, yeah, it was pretty non-existent. It wasn't like in New York where you did have sort of, you know, as much as Hot 97 and Power would spend like all their time playing commercialized for the most part, there was still at least like a little seed of energy there. There were some hosts to be excited about and whatnot. So that really got you.
Yeah.
But when you were going to school for that, what did you think that you were going to end up doing with it?
Stupid as I thought I was going to be a radio show host. And quickly you kind of find out how hard that is to do in New York. And you see that like with the young people who were in New York at the time, like the Scotty Beams and folks like that were under folks. Like it's hard to kind of get a radio show going. So when I graduate college, I just like, I'm gonna get a regular job because it's really like 2011 is the recession. And
right. And the crazy thing about you saying that is that it went from it being considered almost impossible to get a job hosting a show talking about things because you only had a couple of different outlets that would host you, to now where almost everybody does it.
Anybody can do it.
And very few people have any kind of success with it, but everybody's doing it.
Yeah, and they all look like amazing sets, and it's kind of crazy to have that emulated. But yeah, it was a different path. But then I saw an opportunity to do this type of stuff where I can go back and look and deep dive and cut the fat out, because a lot of podcasts are like 3 hours long now. And it's like people don't have that time. So to highlight the highlights is what I do.
And that's why I almost feel guilty about listening to your content from time to time, because I'm like, wow, I'm really allowing these 5-minute breakdowns of this podcast to replace any chance of me listening to it in full. Now, granted, I'm a clip guy when it comes to most podcasts. Besides very few, I just don't really have the time to sit down and consume 2 hours or something, even though I really want to. Like a lot of times when somebody mentions that, like, oh, that interview tomorrow, that's canceled, that guy can't come, in my brain, it's like, ooh, I can watch some podcasts. Nice. Like that's actually what I want to do with my fucking free time, but I don't have enough time. And you actually, sometimes I'll even listen to a full podcast and then I'll end up going to a video from somebody like you that breaks it down, and I notice additional dynamics that maybe I didn't latch onto because of the fact that I'm inundated with my phone and a million different things going on and stuff like that. So I do feel like it's an important service. But when did you become a fan of the Joe Budden podcast? Early on?
I was a fan, I would say, around the time Mal got there. When Mal got there, I felt like the chemistry was great. I used to listen intermittently before Mal got there, but Mal was kind of the turnkey event for me, where it became like, to me, Joe Budden wasn't the most likable person. And Rory was kind of like that Gen Z type of dude that made him more connect to me. But then Mal got there and he was able to kind of take conversations, reframe them in a way that I think made the podcast go to another level.
That's interesting, because I feel like Mal does not get a lot of praise in this current economy, because he's not exactly exhilarating. He's not controversial. He's not a hot take guy. What do you really feel like he brought to the table that was necessary there?
I think he made it feel like what a lot of people try to emulate, which is the Friends podcasting thing,
right?
Where it was like he was able to talk about things that Joe had went through and make fun of them. And somehow he, like the infectious laughter, the energy he had in the beginning, infected all of it. And he was able to talk about his Hove connections, his Jay-Z's, his things like that. And he unlocked a different level of the show. I feel like it kind of looked like just guys podcasting, and then became the friends who podcasting.
You know, okay, that's one thing. This is totally out of order with everything else, but there's one thing I've heard you say that I felt a little conflicted about. When you were talking about Melyssa Ford, you said basically like she should be giving more of herself in the sense of contributing more stories from her days as a video vixen and shit like that. She's got to have crazy ass stories about all these famous dudes, etc. And when I heard you say that, I was a little taken aback, because I've been in the position, no disrespect to them, where I've had past hosts who would not shut the up about any encounter with celebrity that they've had throughout their life. Hardcore No Jumper fans are going to obviously know exactly what I'm talking about. But I feel like a lot of times people who start podcasting and maybe don't necessarily have the IQ to have in-depth, provocative discussions end up sort of falling back on the times that they spend, like, you know, their stories from their life. Like, even for me, I've been doing this for like 8 years. So I feel like most of my stories from early in my life are kind of used up, not really what I want to focus on. And I feel like I see that in somebody like Joe Budden, where it's like, yeah, he probably has amazing fucking stories about being a drug addict, working with all these rappers, getting dicked around by the labels, etc. But most of that stuff has probably been said by this point in his career. So I feel like he then focuses much more on what's going on right now.
Yeah, I think when Melyssa Ford, why I said that was because she is not just a video vixen, she's the video vixen. And a lot of the stuff that she talks about, to me, it could be couched in her experience as the top video vixen, being the girl that everyone wanted to be with at a certain point. And with Joe, like, some of the stories he would tell weren't even that, like, he's just a great entertainer, that he would talk about going to the club and meeting the lead singer of Groove Theory and him taking his girl. Like those little stories right there are ones you don't expect, right? And I think
but once you tell a story like that, it's pretty much used up forever. It's like that story is never really going to hold that much weight. Whereas like previous hosts that I had were just kind of like telling the same story about celebrities that they were involved with over and over and over. And at a certain point to me, it's just like, this is ridiculous. You have to leave this alone at a certain point, right?
Yeah. No, that's different. Yeah, that's a totally different thing when you're regurgitating the same thing. But when you have a bevy of knowledge like Joe who does it differently every time, then I think you unlock the next level of relating your celebrity to the world in a way that makes it seem normalized.
The difference, it's the difference between a glitch and a feature.
Certainly.
Because it could be the same thing, but it could be used as a crutch or it could be used as a superpower.
Yeah, and Joe's kind of mastered that. Yeah.
Why do you think he's the podfather? Why is he the GOAT?
I think he's the GOAT because he embraced podcasting at a time when it was a joke. And he also took it very serious in ways that maybe others didn't. So like when you see Gilly and Waddle, I don't know if they take podcasting as seriously as Joe. You take podcasting seriously, I can tell that. And he also is kind of like not just hip hop. Like he can break down a Creed song. He can do different things. He can bring the casuals in. And he also quickly realized that he needed other people. He needed friends to do it. And he just loves the game. You can tell. You can tell by his days as a radio host back in Hot 97. That's a part of his journey that isn't really explored much when he was the Hot 97 morning show. And I think all of that makes him the podfather, like dating back to then. Not many of the podcasters have lineage dating back to the early days of New York City hip hop radio.
If I'm going to give Joe GOAT status in podcasting, which I'm not going to be biased here, I'll give him that to some degree. I feel like the thing that you have to give it to him is that there's a lot of podcasts that can do big numbers. Podcasts like Drink Champs, but their numbers entirely hinge on their guests. I'm not really sure what a Drink Champs chat episode would do views wise. Obviously everybody clickbaits everything. There's basically no chance that there would ever be an episode like Nori and DJ FN shoot the shit. It would always be clickbaited as something. That's just how this game is kind of, but he has the highest average views for a podcast that is not guest based. And then they obviously see a surge when they do the guest thing as well. And you probably have to give it to him that as much as their YouTube numbers look decent or look very, very good, that they probably also have a much larger audience on the podcast apps as opposed to somebody like Akademiks who does very, very good numbers, but nobody's listening to him on any other platform besides YouTube. So all of his views are consolidated in one place. And he kind of like innovated the format of just having a bunch of people talking about topics on a daily basis and not being so interview based. I mean, I can say that the No Jumper show and all the shows that we've had on here, that was largely influenced by the Joe Budden podcast.
That's like, podfather is a strong word, but that's another thing. A lot of people try to copy that. A lot of people tried to get a Rory. A lot of people tried to get them all. And you could see it. I think, I'm not saying you emulated that. Like I heard you say on the previous podcast, like you wanted it to be the friends or the universe of the No Jumper and not be so guest reliant. And I think that's why I could never consider dudes like Nori in that tier. And Gilly and Waddle, I'm kind of sad that they used to be somebody or a podcast that focused on friends and stuff like that, but then they pivoted.
That is true. They did pivot out of that hard.
Yeah.
What year? Pre-pandemic,
I believe. And I mean, I got them a lot of money, but I think it lost maybe the soul of that. Because I remember right when they did that pivot, they lost a producer or something like that. And I think that's when the bag came for them.
Yeah, I mean, because even when you talk to Mona and Don't Call Me White Girl, it's almost like she's just talking about this forgotten age of $1 million worth of game, because it's like, oh, right, they did have co-hosts at a certain point.
Another show.
To me, that kind of stuff, it might cost more because, if you have to pay consistent hosts, you got to put them on salary or you got to pay them per episode versus if you just get guests, usually that's just based on relationships. And a lot of times you don't have to pay them. But to me, there's something like very resilient about having that group because you're able to, No Jumper's views are so all over the place. Sometimes I put out an interview and I'll get 1 million views or 500,000 views. And sometimes I put out an interview and it gets 10K, 15K. And it's just like, to me, I've kind of accepted that. A lot of times the clips will do better than the full podcast because the clips can be titled in a way that draws more attention and everything like that. But if we're going to give Joe the GOAT podcaster status, I do, like that innovation of just being super early is super important. But You go to your subscription tab on YouTube and you see, let's say like a seismic event has taken place. The slap. Will Smith slapping the out of Chris Rock. I'm using this as an example because this was something that for like a few hours, everybody on earth was so fascinated by. Yeah. If you put out your clip talking about it 24 or 48 hours later, it probably was just not going to hit. So you go to your subscription tab and there's Akademiks, there's Joe Budden, there's Charlemagne, there's me, there's whoever. Let's just stick with those ones that we just named. And they each have a 10-minute podcast clip talking about it. Who's drawing you in the most? Because I'm going to be real with you. I feel like I'm clicking on the Akademiks clip before the Joe Budden clip.
I think given my age, I'll go to Joe. Joe is just somebody who I know has a flair, and the people he has around him are interesting too. I think Ish is interesting. I don't know if that's a sore spot for you, but I think
which one am I beefing with, Ish or Ice?
Ish.
Okay,
you definitely would be beefing with Ice.
Okay.
You would not be beefing with Ice.
Really? Why? He's too street?
No, Ice is just, people hate on me, but I think he's really not that engaging as a podcaster. But one of my goals here is just not be as bad as Ice when I'm doing this interview with you. Because I don't know.
The standard.
No, because in my channel, I'm very critical of Ice. So if I come here and I'm bad and I'm worse than Ice, Danny from the stop has taken an L.
I mean, how much grooming do you think was really taking place prior to Rory Mal leaving? Because that was something that I dealt with, is that when AD, T-Rail, House Phone, et cetera, all kind of like abruptly left, I didn't really have a second string that I was building up behind the scenes or anything like that. So I was just kind of hit with it like, oh, you got to try to fucking reinvent your weekly podcast just from nothing. You think that there was a lot of...
No, I think there was absolutely no grooming. Joe has said that. Ice just kind of, he called him up and he came to the show. He brings them to the show. They do their show for about a year, maybe change. And he realizes that he needs to bring in reinforcements. So that's when he adds Flip and Melyssa forward. So.
And how do you feel about both of those additions in terms of what they've brought to the show? And do you think that adding them was in some way an admission that the original two weren't so great? Because I don't think he ever really talked about bringing in more hosts when it was the Rory and Mal era, right?
Yeah, I think it was a needed addition because Ice and Ish had hit a ceiling. You can tell certain episodes, I studied them, where Joe would be like, you guys not going to intro this? You guys not going to talk about this? All right, elaborate more. So Flip, he was a good addition, but I think he might have reached past his usefulness to the show considering how things are going. But he was very necessary. I know from my own habits, I didn't really enroll in the Patreon deeply until he got there. Like I was just 1 month in, 1 month out.
See, that is the difference in terms of adding a host who already has an established personal brand. Like, for instance, me and Wack 100, very consistent, 200K on episodes, the clip's going crazy, etc. But people are not going to give me as much credit for that because of the fact that he was already an established personality, already doing numbers on other platforms, etc. Whereas I feel like to a certain extent, there's some of that with the Queenzflip thing. I don't know how established you could really consider him because I felt like his wave was more from like short form content rather than, I know he'd been doing the podcast thing, but hadn't he kind of chilled out on it for a while before the JBP era?
I feel like he was kind of like the next to be that math role, like maybe the next tier of like, there's the golden standards of Drink Champs, Joe Budden, but then there was the guys after that. He had stopped, but for me, I've always remembered Flip as somebody from his podcast where he would interview the Bloods. Remember, he was interviewing the Bloods and all the gang members from New York City. And that was kind of taken off, but I think that caused a lot of friction. So he kind of navigated away from that. And he kind of is quiet until he gets to the Joe Budden podcast.
Yeah, you know, that's another thing, though, that I got to give Joe in terms of why he might have the top spot is because he seems to be somebody who has really embraced the potting every day thing or nearly every day. I'm not sure, like how often exactly they're dropping because it's kind of convoluted with the Patreon, which I do not subscribe to, and so I do not know how often they drop on there. But I've heard somebody like Queenzflip say that they'll be podcasting like every day oftentimes. And that is something that I respect because I hold myself to that standard of most of the time doing multiple podcasts per day.
Yeah, I think both of you are well-oiled machines. And I think...
pause. But yes,
okay. Yeah, pause.
He got beard oil.
He got beard oil machines. And I think both of you have different business models that are really successful. And it's interesting that the two of you have friction. And you're probably... I know a lot of people love to say no jumper is finished, no jumper is done, but I don't get that impression. at all. Like sitting in the studio looking at even the other sides of businesses that you work in. But yeah, your models are, I think, the gold standard as far as sustainability.
I'm diversified, man. I was just having sex with a Palestinian woman before I came here.
Name?
Roxy Sinner. Persian, maybe? She supports Gaza. That's all I know. I don't think she's actually from Palestine, but she tweets about it a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm just saying that to say I can just code switch.
Yeah, yeah.
I just went from Johnny Sins to Johnny Podcast real
Johnny
quick there.
Walter Cronkite. Now, I've always wanted to ask that. Like, I thought, this is my notes, like, it feels like that side of your business is way more, like, profitable. Like, it looks like to me. And the way you've talked in the past, it felt like that.
Two very different businesses, because one I own 50% of, one I own 100% of. One has like very minimal overhead, whereas No Jumper has much more overhead in terms of editors and hosts, etc. And then also like subscription revenue versus mostly YouTube, Snapchat, Facebook money / Instagram promo / like all these No Jumper revenue streams. So it's kind of like, and think about the quantity too. On Plug Talk, we drop 4 episodes a week, which seems like a lot, I think, to the fans or to the our peers. But meanwhile, on No Jumper, a lot of times we'll drop, I don't know, like fucking 10 podcasts in a week, plus all the clips and stuff, plus like a couple of vlogs, I don't know. So it's very, very different. I would say that like with No Jumper, only recently have I kind of started to take a step back and look at the actual profitability of certain things with the business and been like, okay, should I be doing 20 interviews a week, or should I maybe be taking a step back and putting more time into these other things? Because I do so many things and it just feels like I have this momentum where I have to keep doing fucking interviews because it's just something I'm interested in, but I'm also trying to do the science in terms of like what exactly is the best use of my time on any given day, you know?
Yeah, what matters. I think that's one thing that is fascinating, because I was listening to you and Joe's interview on AMP and kind of seeing you go through the machinations of like, I know this looks really bad right now, but I see a light at the end of the tunnel, and you're still thinking about that. You're still thinking about which content should I keep, which content should I tweak. But that's why I asked about the Plug Talk stuff, is because like you're only doing those episodes, but you could always do more, right?
Possibly it feels kind of empty in comparison. Just fucking all day. It just feels like it's easy, it's fun, but like comparing that to like having an in-depth 3-hour Benzino conversation, it's just like, I don't know, that just like means more to me, even if the sex stuff was like clearly more beneficial.
Okay.
Also, just how many nuts are you going to bust in a week? You know?
I was thinking more about like just managing other types of things that under the Plug Talk umbrella, not necessarily you being all up in the video.
Sometimes I look at the amount of money that No Jumper brings in and I'm like, God, maybe I should just really focus on porn more.
That's what I'm saying. Sometimes when people get older, they follow the money, and I thought that could be something that happened to you.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, to me, I resent any amount of criticism that I get about the porn stuff. Not like what you said, because what you said was measured, but like what the fans are like, oh, you clearly just care about porn instead of. It's like I do so many more podcasts under the No Jumper name than. Like the fact that I also am doing the Plug Talk stuff is like, I should be getting credit for that, not you fucking trying to act as if the porn stuff was like overshadowing. And like maybe it overshadows it because it's hard for you to pay attention because you are so horny that you can't avoid looking through my Twitter feed without seeing the pictures of girls. Like I showed up to a poker game the other day, and every dude at the table was making comments about the porn thing. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that most of them didn't even know that I interview rappers.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like the visibility of that. But no, I think you look like you're interviewing me, right? Like you're interviewing somebody who has a smaller page. So that means you're deep in the weeds and you really care about this stuff.
Exactly. Like I don't know. I wouldn't be doing this conversation if I was really trying to profit maximize. I would probably be popping a Viagra and just getting another net
Roxy?
out. Yeah, but it's not really.
Roxy, Danny, do the measurement.
I gotta. Yeah, you're right. Thank God I didn't mix the episodes up. But okay, so. What channels were you watching that led you to the idea of being able to make these commentary videos? Because I kind of look at your channel as being like the Warren Chirac, but for the JBP.
It's funny. I used to think about the Warren Podrack. Like I used to think about something
that
like
that. That would be a good name. That would actually be a very viral name if you had chosen that.
So I have to shout out Schick's move. I mean, I remember looking at his channels around the time of the breakup with Rory Mal and Joe. And I would be like looking for stuff, and I was like, I couldn't find anything on it. So I was like, let me become the content that I wanted to watch. And he, obviously, Akademiks was someone who I thought was on the forefront, except he was doing like stuff that I didn't feel comfortable talking about. Like I don't feel comfortable talking about gang wars and stuff like that, just because like I live in the city and I definitely have seen that. But that is what made me pivot to that, and I felt like I know this podcast in and out. I was on the Reddit pages, and the Reddit, me commenting on the Reddit, the Joe Budden Reddit, I used to get these crazy upvotes, and I was like, maybe this could be a YouTube channel, because this is like a metric that might transfer to YouTube. So I do a video, and it gets a bunch of views, and I was like, okay, let me keep going, and eventually we get to here. But my knowledge, my pre-existing knowledge, also my media background from years ago when I was in college, I used to do radio shows, I had a TV show, so there was a bit of blueprint that I had to phone on.
Is it kind of nerve-wracking having the world see you and see your face talking? Because like even for me, it's almost kind of weird hearing your voice that I've watched in so many of these YouTube clips and seeing it actually come out of a human face. It's kind of like a weird experience. I'm assuming that like you probably are thinking about that a little bit too. It's like, damn, this is like kind of weird. Like, did you always assume that you were going to do a face reveal at some point or not?
Yeah, I had to do a face reveal. I mean, Joe Budden tweeted my picture out. That was messed up, Joe.
Okay.
But,
yeah. I want to know about that too. But okay, what's your thought process on that? Are you nervous about this at all?
About this interview?
Yeah.
No. I think at some point you got to do a face reveal, and that's how you get to the next level. I saw Act do that with Everyday Struggle. Not that this is akin to Everyday Struggle. It's just one interview. But no. I am not afraid of what I do. I think I'm largely respectful, and I feel like maybe you could see, maybe you might see that. Like I feel some other people who make content about other podcasters be going in. I try to keep it respectful. So. Oh,
I agree. There is a big fucking spectrum from like totally sick freak version narrative creating, spinning content creators to people who are more reasonable. And one thing that I kind of hate is that there are certain channels, primarily in the comedy commentary genre, which I think you would agree is kind of like more developed than the hip hop commentary drama thing. Because I feel like in that comedy space, there's been channels that I subscribed to because I liked a video or two that I saw dissecting a show like Flagrant. And then as time goes by, it starts to feel like they are thirsty enough for views and money that they start twisting up their narratives and being willing to like create narratives out of thin air and kind of like, you know, exploitatively exaggerate encounters between hosts and stuff. Do you ever feel yourself a little bit tempted to do that sort of thing?
Well, to be frank, people have accused me of doing the same thing. So, I can say, like, I've spoken with members of the show, Imani, Joe, on Twitter Spaces all the time, and they accuse me of that. But I can say, and maybe those guys that you're referencing probably think the same thing. Like, I don't feel like I'm creating a narrative. I feel like I'm actually representing what the show is what's happening on the show. So
what narratives do they feel like you've pushed unfairly?
Ice being bad. Like they say, I bring up Ice like too much. Like they say, I bash him too much. The old cast being better than the new cast, they feel like that's a narrative that I've heavily invested in. Those are the two ones that I feel there's big pushback on.
Those feel like such tame takes that so many of the fans agree with that it's hard for me to imagine them really getting offended by that, especially in comparison to some of the narratives that I see channels pushing about me and other hosts on this channel. Those seems pretty tame.
Yeah. I tell them that. I tell them like, hey man, I really do keep y'all in mind sometimes, but I'm gonna say what I want to say, and I truly believe. You know how when you believe something and you feel like it's fact, that's why I may sound like disrespectful, because I know what I believe is true to me. Like I believe it. I truly believe Ice is not the best podcaster, even though he's a good person. And I truly believe Rory, Mal, and Joe were the best version of the Joe Budden podcast that ever was and probably likely ever will be.
What should Ice do to get better?
Well, I feel like he is getting better. I think he's getting more informed. He used to be someone where the conversation would go to die. He would seem like, I remember there was this one, I always bring this one back up, where he was on the podcast and he says his girl bought him a gift, right? And then Joe asked him, what did your girl buy you? And he's like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. So those types of things would happen often, and I would say that. And then on top of this, other members of the show seem to be critical of Ice. Like Imani saying that, you know, on Twitter, Ice was a different way. I don't know if you remember Ice from the Twitter days.
He was very edgy, right?
Very edgy.
Yeah.
I thought he was like somebody really famous because he was on my timeline all the time. And then Ish saying that it's hard to crack on Ice because he's very sensitive. So those are the two. Those are being less sensitive, being able to take criticisms, and being able to defend his points, because it seems like when he's challenged on his points, he gets a little bit topsy-turvy. He looks disinterested, and he's like, I just said it, just deal with it, type of thing.
To what extent do you think that like actual intelligence matters in this sort of thing, as opposed to like, I feel like what you're describing right there is almost like tactical things, social graces. There's somebody in the No Jumper verse who's gotten a lot of criticism recently for poor podcasting. And when I thought about like what I would recommend that they do, I almost feel like they should go get their GED or like go to college. Like you just need to like do something to stimulate your brain and make it work better.
Yeah, adding more experiences. And I think that's what my criticism was of Ice, is that he proudly flaunted how he didn't listen to podcasts. So I think listening to different podcasts, different podcast styles is also very intuitive. Like it creates an intuitiveness amongst you. Like if you listen to Rogan, if you listen to Schulz, and then you think about and you listen back. And that's my biggest criticism of the current pod, is how they flaunt, how they don't listen to the pod. Like that's just weird to me. Yeah. So I think that would help grow Ice as well.
I feel like one thing that I'm kind of jealous of with the Joe Budden podcast is that it feels like they have, since they only really do one thing, they are able to spend a lot more time working on that thing. Whereas like for me, when we film the No Jumper show, it's like I fucking record 2 podcasts or whatever other content I have to do that day, and then I'm immediately on thinking about the people I have to interview the next day. So it's very difficult for us to really like drill down and point out things. Like one thing I would love to do that I just straight up do not have time to do is I would love to just like rewatch the podcast, find moments of awkwardness or greatness, take notes, pull the dudes in, sit there and say, okay, watch this moment. Watch how you interrupted this person right at this point when they were telling this story and it fucked up the whole flow of the show. Or look at right here how this moment could have been better, or what you did was so good. Not just negative, but positive as well. But it's just so hard for me to fucking find enough time, especially when it does not make really much sense for me from a financial standpoint to like put that much time into the chemistry between the hosts. But I do feel like if you really, really want the chemistry between hosts to be great, that is the kind of thing that it's probably worth investing time into.
Yeah, it is. And I think probably podcasts need directors now. And I don't know if everybody has that. Yeah. It's kind of crazy for you to be in that role, right? Because you run top-down things. So maybe if you had somebody who was a producer or director, it might feel inauthentic, but it could be like someone like, hey, when you told this story about how you went to the store, it was very engaging because you provided clear-cut examples of what happened. But then there was another time when you told the story and you just decided not to tell any details and it fell flat on the audience.
We do have people helping put together like an outline for each episode of the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday show so that there's like a guide, but then also like the worst fucking thing, and I'm sure you remember this happening. Like, this is one of Joe's biggest complaints with Rory Mal, was that they would be supposed to dissect like an album or a fucking documentary or a movie or whatever, and then like the other dudes wouldn't have even seen it.
Yeah. And
that could be extremely frustrating. I'm already in my head kind of like pre-mad at my co-host because we're supposed to watch the Vince Staples show and listen to the Schoolboy Q album.
Yeah.
And it's like, hopefully they do it so I don't actually have to be annoyed. But that might happen. They might actually not watch it or listen to it, and I might be annoyed. So I'm kind of like aware that I might be annoyed a few days from now.
Yeah, podcasting exists in this like weird place where it's friendship, but it's not corporate. And like at your job, if somebody told you, hey, listen to the Vince Staples album and also watch the Vince Staples show and listen to the Schoolboy Q album, they would do it. But here it's kind of like, well, it's sometimes it's supposed to feel organic. And I think at the crux of Rory and Mal and Joe's creative differences was sometimes that balance between organic and business. Like, listen to this stuff so we can talk about it. And yeah, you're right. Sometimes people need to do the homework, but I don't think people do the homework because they rely on people like you and Joe. Like, they can turnkey conversations in ways. So, do
you think that the Joe Budden podcast should hire you as a producer?
No.
Why? You're too close to it?
I'm too, like, I think I like doing what I do. I don't want to be too, yeah, you're right. I don't want to be too close to the situation. And I feel like there's other people they could hire to do that. I need to be able to be unbiased. Even some people say I'm not unbiased now, but this is why I love being here, because this is not like, this is a platform people would be surprised on, right? If I was connected to the Joe Budden podcast in any way.
Yeah, because I feel like your model is that you tend to go towards like bigger stories when it's outside of the Joe Budden podcast. Like, for instance, the Jess Hilarious being added or not added to the Breakfast Club. You covered that because that's like a very big story, even though it's not Joe Budden adjacent. I've seen you cover like some No Jumper related stuff. Usually when it rises to the occasion that it's like worth talking about. Does it, like, how many other podcasts do you watch on a consistent basis? The other day I was talking to Vlad and he said he does not watch podcasts like at all.
Wow.
And I was kind of taken aback by that because I watch so many goddamn podcast clips that I find myself like really having to force myself to not click on stupid, irrelevant podcast clips that I'm tempted to watch.
I mean, Vlad's a legend. I mean, he can do general things, so I can see why he probably like watches documentaries about Vietnam the way he like does things. But I'm sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, watching stuff outside of your normal routine.
So I listen to a lot of Charlemagne. I listen to a lot of non-hip hop podcasts, so stuff like Gimlet, The Pitch, Serial, and things like Radio Rental. So like Scary Stories. I don't know if you're familiar with Radio Rental, because I like the sound design other podcasts have. Like, no disrespect to these type of podcasts I listen to, but I feel like playing spooky music when someone's talking could really transform an experience. On top of that, I watch a lot of documentaries, documentary podcast. I was listening to something about the George Bush years and, Watergate scandals, like those types of things.
Do you have a job that allows you to listen to podcasts on the job, or is this all in your free time?
No, I have a job that allows me to listen to podcasts where I work. But there's also scanning you can do on the Reddits and that type of information. And I can also rely on the information from previous years that I have. But yeah, my job does allow me to listen to podcasts because I'm an office worker.
Oh, I'm very jealous of that. That would be so great for me to just be able to.
Job?
If I was like a truck driver and I just knew like a security guard, I got like 8 to 10 hours where I can just listen to podcasts today. But then I know that would lead me into doing something exactly like what you ended up doing. Is that like I could only become so much of a podcast fan before I was like, okay, I got to start talking about this shit.
Yeah, and I got to say, it's fun being a lone wolf sometimes. Like, I don't have to rely on anybody. I used to have a podcast I did back in the day, and the amount of disagreements you get into with other people while podcasting is crazy.
Really?
Yeah.
What was stuff that you dealt with?
Just the creative control. I used to do a sports podcast, and then it was like, why are we doing radio on the internet? Like, why aren't we doing podcasting? And, where to book the studio, how to pay for studio, how to clip it, how to title it. Should we be clickbaity? There was like a time where clickbaity was like, there's still that now, where clickbaity was considered like the most disrespectful thing you can do. Whereas I feel like now people know you got to market yourself. And we were talking about baseball games, but we should have been talking about LeBron. Like that was kind of the creative differences. Like, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, but that's always kind of the choice is like, do you go towards things that are inherently viral and inherently like the biggest news, or do you focus on things that maybe are more authentically something that you care about? We deal with that quite a bit because we'll end up talking about a bunch of gang politics and shit on the podcast half the time. It's not really like my world, but I know a bit about it, and then like the hosts are just all up in it, so we end up fucking talking about that kind of shit all the time, and we get a lot of comments that are like, nobody gives a fuck about Crip politics. But obviously a lot of people do. There's just like another large percentage of people that do not give a fuck.
Yeah. And it's crazy because then you start to think about the fan base. It's like, 5,000 people may have watched this video, but did I connect with them more deeply than the video that 35,000 people watched? And that's kind of where I'm at with it, where sometimes I'll put a video out, maybe it doesn't do the views that I want, but the commenters are way different than the views on that are higher. Yeah, like when you see that a video gets you a surge in subscribers, that can be kind of thrilling, even if it's not necessarily the biggest one. Or even like when we interview chicks from Baddies, the gender, it's a show on the Zeus Network. It's just basically a bunch of black women attacking each other. It's really not my kind of thing, but a lot of people seem to like it. And
when we interview those types of women, oh my God, the percentage of female viewers is like 80%.
Yeah, that's very valuable.
The exact opposite of our normal episode.
Yeah, I see like when I do no jumper videos, I think I'm not an authority on no jumper like I am Joe Budden, so they don't do as well. But I do see different people commenting, and it's kind of like, well, should I stop doing no jumper just because there's less viewership, or should I just double down and bring Danny to the no jumper verse? So it's like all these things you kind of do. Whereas other people do no jumper videos and they go crazy, but they might do a Joe Budden video and it flop.
Do you find yourself having to check yourself when you're potentially making a video with like a uniquely negative angle that do you ever check yourself and say like, well, maybe I'm adding to the negativity here and not necessarily reflecting reality? Because that's the opinion that I have of some channels, not yours so much. I'm kind of surprised to hear that they feel that way about you.
Yeah, like I said earlier, like I think I try to very much reflect what I'm watching. And in the video, I might say, like, I don't think these guys are going to fight each other, but I do sense that there was some type of disagreement between Ish and Ice when Ice said that he's okay with being made fun of. Like, I felt like Ish felt as if that's not true. And I try not to create narratives. Like, I try to base them on some reality. I look at myself like as a sports dude. Like, if this dude made a bad play, I'm going to talk about it. But I guess that's something that people say is like, why don't you do a positive story? Like, Joe just had his 700th episode. Why didn't you do Joe Budden has his 700th episode?
Anniversary, who gives a fuck? That's such a non-story.
Yeah. And that's my thing is like, you go where the people want to hear what you want. Like, it's kind of selfish, I think. Like, people want to hear about the podcast dynamics, and I think that's what my channel exists for. So I'm not going to move off that.
I've seen it where it's very like giving somebody advice on a fucking bike trick or a skateboard trick or something sports related, athletics wise. You know, if I corrected my friend's form in the gym, not the kind of thing that they're likely to take personally. On the other hand, correcting how somebody podcasts, oh man, it's a minefield, because it's so easy to offend people because you are essentially critiquing their personality. And that is like something that it's hard to have a relationship with someone where you can do that. You have to be extremely careful with the way that you do it because so many people are so sensitive. And that's something that I've encountered many times. I know that back in the day, there was some No Jumper podcast clips that I ended up taking down because me and my now wife, I was basically doing that. You know, I'm like basically saying like, you know, me telling her to do something or not do something on the podcast, very unlikely to go well in comparison to doing that to one of my hosts. But even with the hosts, extremely difficult because they're likely to take it as me just calling them dumb or obnoxious type shit. You know, you have to really go about it in a very deliberate way if you want to avoid that. What the fuck are you writing down?
I think what you just said to me was AD, and you kind of like, yeah, when you gave him creative. And that's the thing that I think is lost on this. A lot of that fallout was like not necessarily, it was creative differences where it's like the tick, right? That was a word. Listen, I got 3 pages of like me just writing down about that whole time. And that reflects exactly what you're saying is like you gave advice, but it came off like you were critiquing that person in a way that was very disrespectful. But it wasn't that wasn't the case.
The way I was doing it was I would give them the critique live during the podcast.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why I'm doing that is basically because it's I don't want to go through the whole rest of these 2 hours with you continuing to do this one thing that I think is like a big miscalculation on your part. But then also to sit down and do a meeting where you talk about something that happened conversationally the day before, that takes being a lot more deliberate. And, you know, I think that me as a curator of podcast hosts, I need to be willing to be a bit more deliberate or build out the team to the extent where we're able to do those kind of reviews without necessarily, stepping on people's toes. But for sure, I ran into that problem of just trying to like curate the podcast as I was going, which can be really hard. Like even just as a really simple example, like interrupting can be absolutely deadly to a podcast. I'm sure that you listen to tons of podcasts where it really stands out to you. These motherfuckers will not stop talking over each other, and it's just destroying the experience. When you're actually in a room with a bunch of people talking, if you're not thinking about the final product, a lot of times all the over talking doesn't really bother you because you're just sort of in the mix. That's how people talk in real life a lot. But trying to coach somebody to stop doing that during the podcast is very unlikely to work. And
I think that's what is 7 Mics has brought Joe, like a lot of cutting off, a lot of people, yo, hey, come on, let me finish.
Can I talk?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, maybe it's time we get away from that, or at least put some people off mic so they know that, they're off camera. But yeah, that's why I can't do social audio sometimes, like Clubhouses. It's like, if you listen to podcasts that I produce like yours and Joe's, that feels super crazy.
Yeah.
So, no, I get what you mean.
And that's just a game where the loudest, most bombastic person wins. And even, oh my God, I've heard Wack talk about the different microphones that they have and how if you get this type of mic or whatever, then that's going to make it so that you can talk over the other people. And I'm like, this is a game that you're willingly choosing to play where the whole fucking point is to be the loudest. Like, that just sounds absolutely terrible to me. But yeah, like the incentive to have a good structure and not talk over each other, it just becomes infinitely more important once you have 7 people because like Myron from Fresh and Fit gets a lot of shit. And, some of it's deserved, but like he gets a lot of shit in particular because of this one clip where Asian Doll was talking to her friend. They're at the table. It's him and his co-host. And then there's like 10 girls, 12 girls. And Asian Doll is having a conversation with her friend right there. And he starts barking on her and telling her to stop talking to her friend because when you have 12 people crowded around this fucking podcast table, one side conversation can really fuck this up. And it's very hard for people to understand that because they don't really think about podcasting the way that you have to as a host.
Yeah, and I think there's the cutting off, and then there's like the conversation is going a certain way, and then somebody doesn't cut somebody off, but they say something that takes it another way. It's like, but I wanted to go that way. Why are you going that way? So yeah, there's a lot of nuances to it. And I don't have a podcast with a bunch of people on it, but I just know as an observer, it looks like some of the top guys in the industry are struggling to find out that perfect sweet spot. And I think the Joe Budden Podcast has fell victim to it. Yeah.
So where do you think they're at in terms of the overall health of the JBP? I mean, do you really think that it's worse right now than it was during the Rory and Mal era? I do feel like a lot of people kind of romanticize that era because it really was an organic group of friends. And as the podcast goes, and imagine if they end up with a whole nother cast of dudes, it's going to feel even less organic. It's going to feel like it's going to take a lot of work to sort of make it feel like a genuine group of friends. I feel like the No Jumper show has kind of gotten back to that, but in the immediate aftermath of AD and them leaving, it was so hard to put together a group of people where it really felt authentic,
Yeah, I think what it is I feel like both of you and Joe have maybe in some ways lost the organic nature of conversations, but the business is probably more solid now. So it may be healthier than it was before, and that's a perfect trade-off. I think the Joe Budden Podcast is in a good spot to lose a couple co-hosts, but I think Joe is such a good leader in terms of making entertaining content. But I do think it's a little unhealthy to have all those mics, and I feel like the conversation is hurt on a weekly basis. And I know Joe is trying to dial back and have people appear on the Patreons, but I don't know if that's the best to build on. And I think the Rory and Mal era is I don't know, because like, let's take wrestling, right? Stone Cold, The Rock, people say that that's romanticized, but I feel like that truly was the best era. And I feel like Rory and Mal represent that. But there was also low lows with the Rory and Mal era that this pod is better than. And but I think the pod is healthy by business standards, but I don't think the best creative effort is being put forth.
Interesting. Yeah, because I mean, it's easy to forget that during the era of the JBP having Rory and Mal, that Rory and Mal still got shit on a lot for being, not, and not only just by Joe, but by the fans as well for being uninteresting or not having good takes or being kind of dull or whatever, probably all the same criticisms that people would levy at them in their current state as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting dialogue to have about Rory and Mal now. But yeah, at the time when the things were imploding, it was, these guys are industry, they don't want to say anything. Little did we know that may have been colored by what was going on behind the scenes, and they didn't feel as invested in the show as maybe they were.
How much Rory and Mal do you listen to?
I listen to a lot. I listen to a lot. I watch a lot of their clips. I don't listen to every episode, but I catch an episode every so often, like maybe once a week.
I almost gave Rory a rant recently when I listened to a clip of, I believe it was them talking about Fresh and Fit and Flagrant. And I watched this clip. They're spending a lot of time like going back and forth over the details of the story. Like, did Fresh and Fit even appear on Flagrant? There's time taken out of this podcast clip trying to figure out if they ever even appeared on it. I'm sorry, this is not the kind of thing that I feel comfortable clicking on. Like, if I'm going to click on something, I need you to be speaking with authority. That's one thing that I could give Akademiks is when I click on a fucking clip, I can usually count on him understanding the subject matter better than me. I ultimately did not make that clip. I thought about making it. I was going to go Big 22, but I was going to text Rory too and be like, yo, this is just content. I'm just gonna fucking go off on you guys.
Like real though.
Yeah, but like it's just for fun because I don't want you to like feel like I actually don't fuck with you because I do fuck with you. But you know that would have been good actually if I did that because it would have gave him something to talk about. We could have talked about it, you know. But I'm kind of letting people in behind the veil there. I don't do a lot of that. But I think
I love that you do it with me. That's awesome.
Well, but that's like Israel dropping the pamphlet saying like, hey, we're gonna bomb you. Get the fuck out of here.
This is not war, yeah.
They do that.
Yeah, okay.
And that seems kind of, I mean, it sucks that you got to bomb the hospital, but it's cool that you warned everybody to get out beforehand. Yeah. Like, you know, it sucks that if I went in on Rory Mal, but if I warned them beforehand, then it's kind of like, oh, then this is just for content, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that the content describe content over everything for the audience if they don't know what that is?
Well, content over everything, I think, is kind of, to me, like wrestling, right? Like where maybe Triple H and Ric Flair are hanging out at the bar and they see some fans and they are like, we got to pretend like we're not cool because content matters more than us being friends right now. And I think things like Joe purposely disagreeing, podcasters do this a lot, where they take a vantage point that they don't really agree with to further the entertainment value. So the entertainment value at all times is the priority. Friendships, how you feel about stuff is secondary to that. That is COE.
Sometimes when I'm podcasting with Wack, I feel like he's just sitting there trying to think of anything possible to disagree with me on. And like, not that he has to actually disagree with it, but he's just trying to find anything that he can act as if he disagrees with just so that there's content, which I think is a very fair strategy as a content creator. But then also at a certain point, it starts to feel disingenuous, right?
Yeah, and the lifespan on that is short term because I would think that like Wack and you are probably is a long term thing, right? Where it's going to be like 5 years. You're going to be doing the podcast, right?
I wonder. I was sitting there with the Insane Clown Posse and him yesterday, and they've been together for like 30 years, 32 years.
Shout out to them. I remember them.
And I was just thinking like, me and Wack have been doing this for like 8 months or some shit. Like, and you know, sorry, there's been a few ups and downs. Yeah. Like, you know, can I imagine what 31 more years of this would be like? I'm not really sure. That's why I think like the group conversation in hip hop is one that is more challenging than people give it credit for, because to stay together as a group over decades has got to be so unbelievably difficult, especially when you have a large group. I mean, that's just two dudes, so that's one thing, but
ICP operated kind of in a counterculture where I think it's maybe easier to stick together. I don't know if maybe they're on mainstream or a lot of people ingest their music, they stay together as long.
I think if you want to take on a group project like that you just have to really be willing to stick it out and think about waking up like almost every day of your life putting on clown paint. Even just that, like you have committed yourself to something that is so beyond what most people have to do. When you think about how easy the life of the Migos is that they just walk out on stage and they're not even a fucking group anymore, but prior to recent events, you know, like you just get to dress however you normally want to dress. You don't have to paint your fucking face. Like, I mean, them taking that on, it's pretty impressive.
Weren't they on like the federal watch list or something? Like, weren't they?
Well, so their fans got labeled a gang.
Yeah, the Juggalos.
And in fact, when I went to a college, right when I graduated high school, I went to a college to check it out that my parents were trying to urge me to go to in Keene, New Hampshire. And one of the local word around town was that the Juggalos and the Jocks are at war in this small town. And I never really like found out much about, I don't know if any bodies were dropping or anything like that, but they were at the very least like brawling. And actually ICP are like traumatized from the FBI labeling their fans as a gang because they got dropped from Hot Topic. They wouldn't carry their merch anymore.
Really?
You know, they were saying that like a mom got pulled over driving and her son had a Insane Clown Posse shirt on and they arrested him for being a gang member.
Oh my God.
I know, right?
That's
it's like
scary.
kind of hard to believe, but
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when they were on TR, like they seemed like they were positioned to take the next, and then it just got taken away. But,
yeah, I mean, to be fair, like their style, I don't know if it was ever really meant to be mainstream.
top of the charts.
Yeah, but
I don't think so.
They've had their own. I feel like they were like a real voice for white trash culture that like white people didn't have at a certain point.
Yeah, yeah.
Now we have like Steven Crowder and Tucker Carlson and stuff.
Steven Crowder, who's that? I Tucker Carlson, I know. But
So you're really not on the right wing podcast scene, huh?
yeah, I thought I was expecting to see a right wing of this thing, like they said when everybody left.
If
Remember
Richard
that?
Spencer was here just giving a speech
I
for
thought
this.
he was gonna just be back there. Like,
Wait, how did you avoid becoming a Red Pill podcast guy?
I don't even know Red Pill like that, but you mean like the ones where they talk about like women and how they treat men,
Dating and how what you should expect from a woman as a man and how to carry yourself and what to do and not to do on a date, etc.
Fresh and
whatever.
stock.
Fresh and fit, you know, all that kind of stuff. Is that doesn't tempt you at all?
No, it doesn't tempt me. And actually, I think I get a taste of that whenever I like make a comment about Melissa Ford. Yo, they be at me like, and it is like, why are you protecting Melissa Ford? But now I try not to like back with the gang stuff, back with this Red Pill stuff. I try not to get too crazy into that because I'm afraid of the energy it might bring back to me, and I don't want to. I feel like people might think I'm a character as Danny from the stop, but I really feel like this is genuinely me, like analyzing podcasts. I don't want to give out relationship advice. Back when I used to do program directing for my college radio station, a lot of people used to do shows about like sex and stuff like that. I was like, this is so not engaging. If I ever make a radio show, I'm not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
And same with gang stuff, same with Red Pill and all that stuff. I don't know if I'll change one day, but that's kind of my stance on it.
I can kind of imagine that all that Red Pill shit, dating conversation shit 10 years ago would have been very, very interesting to me. 20 years ago when I was like fresh out of high school, oh my God, it's actually like really, really cringe and embarrassing to think about how much I probably would have enjoyed and been interested in that content. Because when you're young and you're really trying to like figure out women and like figure out how to control how to behave, how to, you know, how you're supposed to move around in the world, how to attract women, etc. Especially these days where it just seems like really challenging to be on the dating market, given that there's just such transparency of information on these dating apps and everything like that. I think that shit would have sucked me in so hard when I was young, and at this age, it just really doesn't at all. But you know, I wonder if I was single again, would I all of a sudden be very interested in that shit? Probably not, because I feel like I've kind of figured all that bullshit out.
Yeah, I think with the Red Pill community, it's important to remember that the cream rises to the top, even in that community. Like Andrew Tate and Kevin Samuels, they probably would have found a way to get to the top of some niche because of how good they were at speaking.
I think if anything, the niche was kind of created because of their fan bases. And then when you look at the other adjacent channels, those are
derivatives.
You know, there just needs to be more content about this stuff. So people end up going to the Pearls of the world. You fuck with Pearl?
That's the lady, right?
Yeah, that's the lady.
The lady.
Allegedly. They do. Some people think she's trans. But,
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm not touching that. But yeah, I'm familiar with, I don't watch her, but I'm familiar with her. She got demonetized.
Yes.
Okay.
I interviewed her very early on, and she's a real piece of work.
What happened?
I mean, she just like really heavily leaned into the like girls are dumb, let's go viral by saying that girls are dumb type content, which, you know, especially as a dad with a young daughter, it just really kind of horrifies me.
Yeah.
Just to see.
Like, girls are not dumb. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of incentives for girls to basically like not be dumb.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it's just like so much of it. Or even like her more recent stuff has just been like tweeting about how younger women are more attractive than older women, which the very basic element of that is pretty obvious that like, yeah, the average 20-year-old woman is more attractive than the average 40-year-old woman. But she just takes it to the logical extreme, and it's just like, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? Like, this is not where you should be going with your content. I don't understand. Yeah. Hit me with something else in that book.
Oh,
what else you got?
I have things over here.
Yeah,
listen.
Fire away.
I don't want you to be taken aback by some of the questions I ask. You might think I'm going too back in the past.
Whatever you want.
You sat down with Joe Budden, right? And I remember I saw your blog the other day where you were in Williamsburg. Great stuff, because that's my neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
But when you sat down with Joe Budden, I feel like there was a lot of things going on. Sorry, pardon me. And how did you feel after that? I feel like at the time, everybody thought you cleaned his clock in that argument. And I agree. But then when the breakup happens with you and everybody starts to reframe it as if, yo, Joe was right. And I don't think any of the points that they made in that was anyway indicative of what would happen later. But I also noticed that there was signs of tension at No Jumper during that interview as well.
What were the signs of tension at No Jumper during that interview?
Well, you had earlier, like about 30% into the podcast, said that you were having discussions with people about saying that they wanted like ownership in the No Jumper brand. And I was like, that seems recent. That does not seem like a callback to maybe.
Nobody ever like formally asked me for ownership in the brand, just because it would be so absurd and outlandish, because it's like I just like have built it up to a point without anybody. But no, actually there were some hosts who were around way back in the day who were kind of pushing narratives like that and just saying like, I was around for all these years, why don't I own a percentage of it? And I mean that was very troublesome to me, because that's not how this works. Here's how it works. You either get paid with money or you get paid with ownership. And if you get paid with money, you can't show up after the fact and demand ownership. From a legal perspective, if you weren't being paid with money, you could show up and say like, well, I think I deserve 20% of this. I'm going to sue you because I feel like I deserve this. You know, that's why you pay people, is because you want to retain ownership. So I definitely had, some back and forth back then. But I mean, I see that with groups of podcast hosts all the time. There's this like smaller podcast called The Apollo that is like basically like it stems from the whole Back on Fig universe. It's like some dudes that they're friends with started their own podcast. This one dude, Mack Wop, is paying for everything. He bought a fucking warehouse. He's doing this podcast, whatever. Now all the other hosts on the show are like, we should start a new channel. We should be splitting the fucking super chats. We should be splitting the income. It's like, have you not acknowledged the amount that he's fucking invested into this? Like, it's a much, much smaller version of the No Jumper saga.
Yeah,
but
it's hilarious.
It's kind of like a extremely common thing to have people who don't know shit about business going to the person who's actually like going out of their way to do proper business and build their shit up like a real business, and demanding things that are basically totally outlandish. And that will just happen until those people get educated enough to realize that that's not how the game works.
Yeah, but that takes a while. It may never happen, and people just get bitter and start to say like they were robbed, like sometimes. But on top of that, there was something interesting happened that I thought was real. You were supposed to be the State of the Culture co-host, right?
Okay, so Joe hit me up because I was just writing about this in the History of No Jumper documentary, talking about how, in a brief period from like 2015 to 2018, I went from just like a pure fan of hip hop media to Joe Budden hitting me up on Twitter. I just went back and like read through the DMs when I was writing this and saying like, oh, like come meet up with me so we could talk about you being on the show. I think like I already was just way too successful at that point and making way too much money that like I just, there was no dollar amount that he was going to be able to throw at me that would actually make me move to New York. But then also when I think about it, dude, like what would my role have been on that show?
I was talking to Joe on the Spaces.
I would have been a big white punching bag. That's
exactly what I said. So on the Spaces, I told Joe, like, in that, like, you kind of painted Adam out to be like this horrible person, right? And I was like, well, why did you want him on State of the Culture? And then I made the analogy of like, Hannity and Combs, right? You have the kind of 6-foot Republican dude with nice hair, and then you get the geeky looking Democrat to kick his back in.
I always think of this example, and I feel like people don't remember that show anymore, so they don't know.
I remember that show. The thing is, I watch Fox News because they used to kick ass in the ratings, and I was like, why do the Republican hosts always win? But yeah, I think you were just going to be the Combs of State of the Culture.
Yeah, probably something like that. I mean, because I've always followed Scotty Beam, and I noticed that she's like talked shit about me a few times, like maybe before or after that time period. So she would have been ready to tee off on me. Maybe Joe would have been a little bit more diplomatic. I don't know. I feel like Remy Ma and I probably might have got along after a period of time.
The shoulder to cry on, right?
I don't know. I went to a rap battle, and her girlfriend took metal folding chairs and pulled them right up to the front of the stage. So everybody's standing, and they're the only ones sitting down.
Yeah.
And I was like, I like that you carry yourself with such a degree of respect. But also, like, even him breaking down that show, I'm just standing there thinking, this makes no fucking sense. This is never going to work.
What did you think? Like, it was like watered down everyday struggle? Did you think it was just like...
It sounded like a boring version, like a boring, not organic version of the Joe Budden podcast. And then it also just sounded like it was going to cost a lot to produce. And even at that time, I was just thinking like, well, unless you guys get crazy sponsorships, this shit is not going to pay for itself. They never got sponsorships and never turned into anything. But there was that whole era, and this is a perfect time to talk about it because BuzzFeed just like offloaded Complex for like $100 million, which might sound good if you're not familiar with the fact that they were worth like $300 million like a couple of years ago. And there was this whole era, and Everyday Struggle was part of it too, where you had all these big media companies thinking that they were going to be able to conceive of a hip hop based show and they were going to be able to make a shitload of money off of that content. And for a time period, that drove up the rates that podcast hosts could expect to get, because let's say that at that time I had wanted to hire Akademiks. I would have had to go head to head with Complex in terms of what to pay him. Obviously, he had his own channel, so that wouldn't happen. But, you know, now it's just slowly becoming a reality. Like, those Spotify deals that everybody was getting. Somebody like me who's essentially competing with those kind of deals, even though not literally, but like now that shit's going away. And now it's kind of like the perceived market value of a podcaster is kind of coming back to earth. And meanwhile, BuzzFeed and Complex and all those channels, they're not under the illusion that they're going to be able to just hire 3 or 4 guys that know about hip hop and create a successful podcast out of thin air. It's not going to happen. It's going to be created by the actual stars, because an Ack or a Joe Budden or a me is just going to create our own thing, and what we are going to be able to get from a Complex is pretty marginal.
Yeah. The consolidations of all these big media platforms that used to be the kings is pretty sad. Like Vice and all of these people, but it's interesting to see everybody's market value go all the way up and then go all the way down. And I think what happened with See the Thing Is ending, right, is there's an illusion to some of these people who got big deals for ads are now having to realize companies are like, these commercials aren't getting the return that we want. And now everybody's value is being realized in real time.
Yeah, because that's crazy, because Rory Mal leave the JBP. Boom, they signed with, who was it, Radio 1? Sirius. Okay. So they're like having a financial path paved for them right there. So they're good. Doesn't matter how well the show's doing, you're still going to be able to make X amount of dollars. And then same thing with Mandy and Bridget Kelly, who, shout out to them and everything. But I was pretty shocked when I went to their YouTube channel and realized that the views were like 5,000 an episode. Because
to me,
I remember the Joe Budden era that they might be getting like 20 or 30,000 an episode on YouTube. And that seemed like a pretty bad failure to me at that time. And then when you made a video about it and you said like, well, they had, a deal with a big company. But I mean, if you're getting 5,000 views an episode on YouTube, that's not really, those deals are going to go away at a certain point. They probably signed them, or Rory in that case, to like try to boost them up, try to build them up. And then at a certain point, they kind of realize, I guess we're not going to be able to do shit to help you.
I think a humbling has come. I don't know if Rory and Mal apply that, but even the Akademiks Spotify deal was kind of like, at the time I was excited for Akademiks deal. And I was like, but then the podcast didn't come back to Spotify. So I think there was a reason for that.
And I'm not doubting his ability to maintain the Academy over the next few years or whatever, but pretty disastrous start. Because
what happened? What do you mean
Lil Boom got exposed as a redacted, which crazy. Troy Ave just got locked up. I don't know how long that's for. And then like he had the comment section podcast with like 4 random dudes that he talks to on Discord, and that doesn't really seem like it's panned out the way that it was supposed to. So I feel like he feels like now he's kind of starting from scratch, unless Troy Ave gets out soon, which I don't know how many years he's expecting to go down for.
I got to say something. You might say I'm messy.
Okay.
Flakko appeared on Akademiks podcast. Thoughts on that?
I saw a few little clips. When I saw the 5-hour timestamp, I was like, okay, I don't got time for this. How did you feel about it?
No, I thought it was great. I thought Flakko was in his bag. I thought, like, man, to see the growth of him. But what I thought was like, it seemed like he was perfect for the Academy, and there's people making those types of conversations, even with, this might be messy, but Flakko saying that he doesn't make 5 figures at No Jumper. I was like, that's interesting.
I think he said he didn't make 6 figures.
Oh, 6 figures
at No Jumper.
My bad. Yeah, that would have been bad. 6 figures. That's exactly what he said. So you did watch that part.
That part got quoted to me, or at least sent to me. Yeah.
Okay, so it was interesting. It was like, and people seem like Flakko and Act 2 peas in a pod, right?
Are they too similar?
I think it'll be like Ryan Russillo and Bill Simmons, where it's like maybe they're similar, but they're still different. And I feel like those guys would be perfect together. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a possibility that he could be better utilized over there. I don't know. If I actually made him a formal offer, then I guess we would have to really take a look at the numbers and say, like, is it worth it? I don't know. I mean, I'm not above having that sort of conversation. I do think it's kind of weird because I feel like he could get a lot of different hosts. Like, he does really good numbers with fucking Ant Glizzy.
Okay.
Why doesn't he start a podcast with him? I feel like when he said that he gave Troy Ave 100K, I was like, you should have gave Ant Glizzy 100K.
It's funny to see your podcast mind go.
Well, I mean, he's done podcasts with a bunch of people that have done very, very well. It just seems to me like you should probably before I would hire a Troy Ave, because Wack was trying to pitch me on the Troy Ave show.
Wow.
On here and shit, like during the episodes of the Adam and Wack show, or maybe it was off camera, but I think it was on camera as well. He would be like, you need to do this deal with Troy Ave. And my thing is, number one, he's in New York. I'm over here. So it's like, if anyone is going to be successful on the No Jumper podcast, it's going to have to be because they mesh so well with me and the other hosts that they kind of just become part of it. And it's just, we're not going to have a successful show that's on the East Coast that none of us are on. Like, now, maybe if it was already an existing popular show and you put it on the No Jumper channel, maybe you would see a bit of a boost, especially if we're promoting it. But, generally, the only success that I've ever been able to have was by actually like incorporating people into my world. And if I feel like by taking the Troy Ave thing and putting it on a much smaller channel, I mean, I don't know how that was going to really ever work out.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't work out for other reasons, but maybe it seemed like I'd like Troy Ave's show. It did kind of do good. I like his music too. So
really,
a lot of people make fun of me for that.
You're so Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just didn't, like, when I was looking at the numbers and I watched a few clips, I don't know. I mean, like, Troy Ave is somebody who can go do an interview with me or Ak or whoever and do really well. Really well being like, 200, 300, maybe 400,000 views. But I don't know, like, it doesn't feel like people want to hear him on a daily basis.
I do. I could see that, just because, not that it's kind of his persona, like arrogant, and maybe sometimes lacks a little substance, like where there's not deep conversations happening, where Joe is like deep conversations, capable of that. I can see that with Troy. Yeah.
Deep conversations ultimately are what it all comes back to, because that's one thing I've kind of realized is that the value of a viral moment is so much less now, because that viral moment will be quickly farmed out to TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And it's just like, who's going to go watch a 2-hour podcast to see the one 30-second moment where people nearly came to blows or whatever the fuck it is. It's like, meanwhile, on the other side of things, if you have a Lex Friedman podcast that's 4 hours, I mean, good luck putting that on TikTok. You might be able to find some little clips, but it's something that is not meant to be consumed in short form. It's meant to be consumed long form. So that works. I feel like anyone who's really like overemphasizing the viral moments is kind of not doing themselves any favors. And I say that with the red pill space in mind, that the girls walking out of the podcast, the TikToks might go nuts, but is anyone really like going crazy tuning into the full length VOD for that? I don't know.
Are you connecting to people with that?
Yeah, it feels like all those gimmicks, it's like the same thing that SoundCloud rap went through, where for a period of time, people were very, very impressed with a young guy with pink hair and face tattoos screaming at random passerbys or having a gun sticking out of his pants or whatever. And all these gimmicks were really hitting for a period of time. And then at a certain point, it just wears off. And now we're kind of in like peak disillusionment with people and rappers, because it's just people haven't really found something interesting enough for them to latch onto, aside from talent and actual good music, which is the hardest thing to fake, right?
Yeah, it's always like you can't engineer that. But yeah, this all started stemming from the sit down you had with Joe back in 2022, and I found it just interesting, like some of the arguments that were being made that didn't really stand up to what I was listening to.
Right. And even when I talked to Ak about that original argument on the podcast, he just said, like, good job on standing up to these dudes busting out these 2015 ass arguments. I think it was what he said, which I agreed with that take in the sense that I think that those guys could have won that argument.
How?
They would have had to do some fucking research and find some find some killer examples of me asking messy questions and find a messy question that I asked where the guy got shot a month later, you know, call me out on some shit like that. But it was just so weak. It was so badly put together. And I saw the arrogance of Joe Budden in that moment because I'm like, you could have easily put in the necessary time to come to this conversation prepared, but instead you thought that your natural charisma was going to be enough to carry you, and it didn't work out. It
was funny. There was one point where he's referencing your Kevin Samuels video, and he says, check the comments. I bet you there's going to be people. And then the comment is like, I love Kevin Samuels. This means so much. He's like completely backfired.
Because he was telling me, they're like, oh, Kevin Samuels is so controversial. And I'm like, with who? Because, yeah, that is controversial to your audience because you got mad grown-ass black women watching your podcast. Guess what? I don't have that problem. All mine's is fucking teenage boys. I don't have to think about that. You know, and like the Kevin Samuels fans are coming in, and they're just, I'm not hearing from the dissident voices in that situation. And, you know, obviously I would like to have that fan base as well. Doesn't seem terribly likely. Maybe we should hire some female talent at some point, but very hard to find women that resonate with the audience as podcast hosts.
Especially a 90% male audience. Like,
especially that, yeah.
Do you feel like sometimes, because I think this is my issues that with the men on the couch, the other men on the couch, is they're very critical of content creators in a way, like, and then they don't have to make those choices, right? So they'll be like, this is mad clickbaity. Why would you do this? And I'm like, but you are just showing up to do a job. And this is, I think, what the issue was with Rory Mal and Ak. Like, Ish and Ice were passing all this judgment on you, but they don't necessarily ever have to make content on their own, and they can kind of rely on Joe to make all those choices. Yeah. Do you feel like that there?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to sit up in your little house and just, you know, cast judgment when you don't actually have to worry about, and I mean, you saw so much of that with the dudes who left this channel, is that they were all very, very critical about all these different things and thought that they were all deserving of more money, and then they leave, and guess what? You're not making any fucking money now. It's like, you know, it's just, the reality of it is that, like, oh, now you get to deal with all the exact same shit that I was dealing with, except that my business is sort of held up by ancillary income streams that you are not going to have access to, like the fact that we have 1 million subscribers on our show on Snapchat, and we get, you know, 10 paid posts a day on the No Jumper Instagram and shit like that, you know, and that has been quite enjoyable to see other people realize that they didn't know as much about the business of running a podcast as they thought they did.
I think it's weird because when you ask people about which networks are struggling, yours is always going to come up, right? Because it's easy to say Adam's struggling versus Drink Champs is struggling right now. But I did think about, what about the Instagram? What about the TikTok? What about the Snapchat? What about all that other stuff? What about your store? What about the merch that you have? And that doesn't get brought up. But I wrote this down because one of the themes in your No Jumper, in the AMP show that you did with Joe, was kind of like this redundancy, right? This redundancy of what Fig factions were doing within your network at the time. And it seems like that's happening now with them, where there's this Figgmunity umbrella, right? But that doesn't seem like the priority, and it's so much so that people within Figgmunity are saying, oh, we're not Fig.
Like, you saw that clip? I seen that, yeah.
And I'm like, isn't it, I'm not trying to take sides or anything like that, but it's just crazy, like, I guess what you did with Mack Wop, like, to see some of the things play out exactly the same.
Exact same thing. Except way less money at stake. Because literally, like, you're talking about people that I was paying 6 figures a year.
You were paying them 6 figures a year?
In some cases, you know? Like, maybe not.
They make it seem like you was paying them.
Maybe not after taxes, yeah.
Okay.
No, but I mean, like, they have, like, made statements about how bad they were getting paid, and then literally do an episode like the next week and just acknowledge that it wasn't actually that bad. Because the thing is that most of the people who left don't pay anyone, or they pay like one guy. I got a whole fucking staff here to be able to support us doing different content all day. Yeah. And I mean, that's just, in a way, it's like they behaved like a bunch of people at their first job, you know? And they probably would never, if they were given another opportunity, if there was an exact clone of No Jumper that offered them the same exact opportunity that I offered them, they probably would handle it much, much differently going forward. And if they didn't have so much pride caught up in it, they would probably just be like asking to come back. Yeah,
I think it's interesting the way you kind of fire back at them. There's like these two Adams, right? There's Big 22, right? Which is like
good man.
Macho Man. Big 22 is like Zero. And then there's Adam, which is, all right, the business was like this and that, this and this and that. And we see the ads. You were also allowed to do your respective shows, and you were able to double dip, right? And I feel like when you do that, it's very interesting to me because that's the part that probably stings.
But you want to know what is there's like podcast Adam, and then there's like short form Adam, like yelling into the fucking phone in the yard. It's just like two different mediums where like one is going to translate better than the other. Whereas if I came on here ranting and raving like a fucking Adderall fueled wrestler for 2 hours, it would come off very strange. Yeah. Whereas like, you know, when I go and I'm like yelling into the phone in the yard, the whole point is to kind of just make this like really intense 60 seconds that will make people laugh and be entertained. I mean, like that's one thing that I think I like learned over the last year or two is that really the entertainment is everything.
Paramount.
The value of the content, how much people are entertained by it is everything. Because so many people, once their content started to dry out and they ran out of shit to talk about with me, they just kind of like became much more open to watching No Jumper content all of a sudden again because of the fact that really ultimately the fans are just excited to watch good content. And you know, I've seen that with a lot of my peers. Fucking Andrew Callahan got canceled out the ass. Motherfucker came out making banger videos every week. I ain't heard shit since. You know, like he's just making killer videos. This shit's doing better than ever because his content is so good, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a certain feeling you get when a creator that you respect drops a video. Like it feels like a blanket, like when you just watching that. And I think there's some people that can't replicate that. And I think your vision with navigating away from lives, right, is probably reflective of that. Like a live sometimes doesn't feel like appointment viewing in the way that something prepackaged does.
Honestly, though, the problem with the live thing is that you can make a pretty good amount of money on YouTube if you drop the content edited with the swears removed, and you know, and we still do some live content, but it's really rolling the dice in terms of like if you'll get monetized or not. And the rates that we were getting during the pandemic and the live content was just paying way better. I mean, that just hugely impacted my decision. I used to want to have people live all fucking day. Like we got to figure out something that they could be doing live here all day long. And then as time goes by, that really kind of fizzled out.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is exclusive to us. But in general, live is very much like, it creates a very engaging experience with the user, but then at the same time, it's really not great for building a business, you know? Unless that's what you do. I mean, look at Aiden Ross. I mean, his whole business is based around being live. It wouldn't make any fucking sense if it wasn't live.
Yeah, I think that's why when you were having your issues, I was like, yeah, I feel like Adam's right about the live stuff.
Do you watch shit live? No, me neither, really. I don't care. Because I want to watch the clips after the fact, or even if not, it's like, if it's a 2-hour podcast, I'm perfectly happy to watch it at 10 p.m. versus 6 p.m. when it's live. Like, it just doesn't really, you know, I'm not going to talk about it the instant it comes out anyway. It's like, as long as I watch it before I might comment on it, then that's fine.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I have so much stuff like I've been wanting to ask you.
We have probably 25 minutes before Wack 100 storms in here and cleans the table, just to put it in perspective.
Shout out to Wack. I'm going to ask these questions. Did you and Flip have any type of interaction?
Not that I know of. I don't think I ever have spoken to him. I think I DM'd him at one point when I watched one of your videos saying that there was trouble in paradise, and I said, hey, how much they paying you? And then he didn't respond.
Because Flip references somebody like coming to him and asking, like giving him a deal or like trying to get him away from the JVP. And I've always felt like you could have been that guy because when they talk about you on the show, he's often very kind and treats you with kid gloves versus the rest of the cast who calls you a piece of crap.
Really? That's very good to know. I do like Queenzflip, but no, our conversation, I think I DM'd him and said, what are they paying you? And then he didn't respond. Also, Wack is about to be 20 minutes later than I suggested. So
I got.
That's pretty good.
Okay, well, I come to do the science. Yeah, so it's interesting to hear you say that. Now I'm wondering, like, maybe if that was positioned as you making an offer in some ways. Because asking someone what they make could look like that.
He could be exaggerating because of the fact that, acting as if you have a bunch of deals on the table is probably beneficial to your bargaining position. But I also would assume that he's probably gotten, like, more substantial
To be real, he didn't say you reached out. I just thought that you did because of the way he talks about you is different. And
he probably just recognizes that I'm a real one because he's a real one. He's been fighting people in the street in these skits for all these years. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're different types of real ones.
You're different types of real
Probably
ones.
fair to say.
Definitely. I also wanted to ask, does it feel weird to have other people attack your business when it kind of seems like your business is uniquely positioned in a way to survive all of like the adpocalypse that's coming for the podcast industry in this space?
I feel like Joe's more positioned to be able to survive a Holocaust business-wise. I don't know. Is that true? Because I feel like I've always heard he makes a shitload from Patreon. So that will make your business very resilient, right? But then it's also really hinging on the fans. Our Patreon certainly took a hit when those dudes left. So I don't know. I mean, I have managed to weather many storms, the adpocalypse being for sure one of the biggest ones, the host leaving another big one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, people attacking each other's businesses. It is kind of weird to realize that people do that sort of thing on behalf of their own business. That like a content creator will go to war with you because they realize that if they negatively impact your business or if they are seen as the victor, they might conceivably actually be able to take your fan base a la King Von going at NBA Youngboy at the exact moment that he realized that he had already maxed out dissing FBG Duck. Von was just so eager to beef with Youngboy because he realized, like, I can take his fans.
Pivot,
Yeah.
I think on the idea of being hurt by people, does it kind of hurt to be in this back and forth with Joe? Because I feel like you looked up to him, and he was like, this is just a comic book geeky analogy, Superman and Shazam. Like it was.
I'm not familiar enough with Shazam, but yeah, no, it does kind of suck because you got to think about it. When I went on that AMP show with him, I was doing so because I kind of needed to make a public statement at that point. I didn't have PR at the time, which I probably should have, but I felt like I needed to make a public statement. I was on the phone with multiple different high-profile hip-hop media types that morning who told me, do not go on a live stream platform with Joe Budden right now. Oh. And I said, nah, Joe's cool, man. It's going to be all right. It'll be cool. And then I get on the phone with him or on the AMP call with him, and he basically totally let me down in terms of like what I would expect from him as like a business person or like even somebody who
I thought he did that.
I thought we were close to being friends. I think that he was salty about the fact that I was perceived as having dominated him in the prior argument on the podcast, and I think that he resented the fact that I did a bit of a victory lap. So I think he saw it as a easy opportunity to try to get a W over me and marginalize me. And, I think that he was also somebody who was probably kind of resentful of the fact that No Jumper was having so much success with having all these different hosts. And when some of them start leaving, that's good for his narrative because, he tried and failed to put together multiple different podcast lineups and they didn't work out. And he paid out his fucking sexual harassment settlement and everything, but I think, it was a very self-serving move on his part. And you see more and more people on a regular basis now who take the content thing and who treat people as disposable objects that they can try to go viral off of. And, I respect it to some degree, but me and him, I thought that we had more of a respect between each other. But then I kind of realized that I had hurt his fragile ego by whooping his ass in a debate 3-on-1.
How do you feel about Joe's curation of that breakup? Because I'm not even talking about them, but the way he curated it.
You mean the No Jumper breakup?
Yeah.
Well, at one point, he was supposed to sign AD.
Whoa. Wait, after the breakup?
Exclusive.
I finally got like
After that, yeah.
news breaking moment in the industry.
I never mentioned it. People put me onto that move, but then
Wait, after the breakup or like
Yes.
before because that would have been interesting if it was before, but yeah.
I don't know if he went and checked the tape, watched some footage, and maybe realized that.
Oh, so you're saying he didn't sign him because there's like shortcomings?
If there were shortcomings with Ice and Ish, and Joe Budden was being real with himself, I think he might have watched the footage and done the science and realized like, oh, these other guys who are being heralded as the next top content creators might be more of the same with some of the other hosts. You know, you don't want somebody who's scared to have an opinion. You don't want somebody who's just going to kind of clam up when it comes time to make that content. So I don't know exactly why it didn't end up working out. Probably would have been a bad idea on AD's part too, but
yeah, I was on a space with Joe. And let me know if I need to wrap up. I'll wrap up.
no, we got plenty of time. Wait till Wack runs in here with the Windex. That's when we're going to be done.
That would be my goal in life, to have Wack 100 interrupt me. But so I was on a space. I was on a space with Joe, and I asked, as someone who went through a breakup, he would have been uniquely positioned to kind of do the science and not maybe fall into the narrative of the alt-right pivot that was being positioned. And I thought, like, if he had talked about kind of exactly what you guys did, the same thing, where it's like you were trying to correct co-hosts on air about what they should be doing differently. But instead, AD goes on his show, calls in, says that there's some type of link between you interviewing Richard Spence and you telling him you're kind of redundant, you're saying the same jokes, and that's why he's gone.
Danny, let me tell you something. In the history of disingenuous arguments, in the history of nonsensical word salad arguments on podcasts, AD acting like he was offended by me interviewing Richard Spencer has got to be up there, because he set up a Nick Fuentes interview a couple months before that. And the only reason why it took place on this platform was because if it didn't take place on this platform, it was going to take place on his platform. And I just wanted to be there. Well, firstly, he offered it because he kind of like realized that it might look weird if he did it on his platform and didn't bring it to No Jumper first.
The Fuentes interview.
The Fuentes thing. But I wanted to be there to make sure that things didn't go off the rails, because from my perspective, he wasn't really equipped to do like a political conversation with somebody like Nick Fuentes, who basically, you know, does this for a living. He's like very, very good at sneaking his agenda into the mainstream conversation. So the idea that there was anything to be mad about with the Richard Spencer thing, it's kind of a stretch. He didn't say anything racist on the podcast. He actually was kind of putting forth his whole repentance story about how he regretted some of the more racist stuff that he did throughout his career, which I thought was very interesting. And, you know, I think in large part that podcast was really, really appreciated by the fans. But, you know, a few people on the hip hop side try to really like misrepresent how that conversation went.
I think the issue with Spence was, I've watched a lot of documentaries, Frontline PBS documentaries about Spence, but it always felt like he never feels genuine. And I think even when he's talking about his repent, it still feels fake. So I think that's always going to be at the core of anything he does.
I do think that to him, it's not so much that racism is wrong, it's that racism is politically not advantageous. You know, it's like you're not gonna win elections by insulting different races and talking about race science and whatnot. It's just not really going to get you, or if you even just want to be a prominent conservative commentator.
Yeah,
probably not going to happen. It's not going to help. It's not a good look.
Definitely. Did your platform get influenced by other people like doing that? Like Patrick Bet-David, I feel is somebody who's having people from different sides debate each other.
Yeah, that came from me doing, like, just spending a lot of time watching Destiny have conversations with people that he was on the opposite side of the aisle from. And that made me feel like, well, fuck, why don't I do more shit like this? Like, you know, I want to have a conversation with Richard Spencer. So, but I also know that, like, me having the conversation one-on-one, I'm very, very much outmatched when it comes to politics or whatnot. So I thought, like, oh, if I get Destiny on it, what could be better than that? But then obviously people want to go with, well, he's not black, so he's not an appropriate person to have this conversation on your platform or whatever, which to me, I'm not really thinking about race as much as like ideology. Like, I feel like when it comes to representing liberalism and progressivism, that Destiny's probably sufficient to have those conversations, but he's not terribly invested in the struggle of black people in America. So I don't think it's the worst argument ever, but yeah.
Yeah. I just got a couple questions left. Do you think they regret it?
The dudes who left?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have, because I feel like the town is small, so you might actually just know that they regret it.
Oh, I know things.
That's what I'm saying.
Some of these guys are leaky fucking faucets, and they'd be having conversations with people that get back to me very, very quickly. So I wouldn't really want to show my hand by acknowledging some of the hard times that I know that certain people have been going through. But yeah, for sure, if there wasn't so much ego about it. And that's one thing I do kind of regret is I wish that maybe if I had just been pure, classy, grace-filled man throughout all of that shit, that it would have been easier for us to just kind of be like, oh, okay, boom, we can just do content together. That would have been kind of cool. But I mean, obviously they started it by just pushing narratives and whatnot. But
would you say you're invested in their downfall?
Only on a fan level, only on like observing it. I'm not like invested in it in the sense of like making content about it. Obviously people text me about them and I'm willing to have conversations about it. But that's the weird thing is like, this is the most I've opened up in a long time about it, because the more I talk about them,
the more energy.
All their best content is about me. So as soon as I open my mouth about them, it just opens the floodgates for them to have shit to talk about. So I try to just stay mum on it, because ultimately I feel like where we're going is a lot bigger than where we've been.
I think why I ask about that is because like with Joe, Rory, and Mal, it seems like Joe doesn't want to bring them up, but he may always want to bring them up, because I feel that at his core, he feels as if they try to railroad his business. And I think that's something men with egos, which I think you and Joe have, I think all men have. Like if somebody tried to come from my channel, which is not the same as your platforms, I would hate them to no avail. Like I would be like, I hate your guts. I will never let this go. So that's why I asked if you understand. Yeah.
But I don't hate AD. Because I feel like AD got suckered into like basically believing a bunch of bullshit that was being pushed on him by various people. And I feel like he knows that now. So I can't say I hate AD. I think AD's a good guy who...
He looks like a good dude. He looks like a great guy. Yeah. I don't know.
You think he's hot? You just like
a different type of podcast.
Just like the look of him?
No, he just looked like...
He's tall.
Like he relates to the nerds, man. Everybody relates to the nerds and does like video game streaming. I don't have any problems with Figgmunity. They probably like, who the hell is this guy with the red beanie? So Figgmunity is all good. It's not like that. I think these podcast breakups, how things end, are fascinating.
Oh yeah.
And it's like I made this before we wrap up. I made this about like the Jay-Z and Dame Dash breakup, right? We still talking about it, but imagine they had done like thousands of hours of podcasts for us to look back at it. We talk about it more. There'd be channels about like Danny from the Stop talking about Jay-Z.
We never even got to hear them have an argument. Yeah. The best thing that we got was Dame Dash talking shit about him and on various podcasts many, many years later. And Jay-Z, he's lucky. He gets to move in such a way that he don't got to comment on shit. Well, I wanted to ask this. Why did Joe post the photo of you? Where did he get it? And what do you think he was trying to say? I thought that he was fat shaming you. I thought I was going to walk in here and see a very obese man. They don't know that I walked right fucking past you in the lobby.
Yeah.
In my brain, Danny was going to be a large, fat man.
Yeah. No, what it was is we were on Twitter Spaces, right? And they were doing like, I think Twitter, I'm in the Twitter space war right now, but so basically they were doing this like game where they were publishing pictures of people, but people who agreed. So it would be like men would publish their picture and the woman would rate it. So then Joe's like, why don't we rate Danny? Because I was on stage. Joe loves being with me in the spaces. Like he's there all the time talking to me. Like it's interesting talking to Joe for long periods of time because like, how do people do it? Like it's like the way he spins narratives. So there have been people who have known what I look like for quite some time. There's people on the Reddit, that loser subreddit that exists for the Joe Budden podcast. Don't follow that one. Go to the Joe Budden Network Reddit. But they basically found out what I look like because my YouTube channel used to be my private channel, like my channel that not private, and I used to have clips of me like when I was in college. So I think they found that through that, and Joe gets that somebody from Reddit DMs him, and he publishes my picture. Yeah, and that was from like 2009. I was like a baby-faced, Mighty Duck Goldberg-looking kid.
One thing I don't understand is like, how do you record a bunch of podcasts talking to these people every week and then go home and get on Twitter Spaces for hours and hours and hours? This has just never really made sense to me. Sometimes when it comes to doing the podcasts, I feel kind of drained from talking to so many people all the time. And I feel like, fuck, if I just only had to do one podcast a week or 2 podcasts a week, I would have so much more energy reserves built up. But that's why I've never even been tempted to go on Clubhouse. And when I see them on the Twitter Spaces, I'm like, so you're telling me you have a business where you all make money, including people who aren't on camera. You all are earning money from this, and then you go home and in your spare time, you do the exact same thing into your phone for free. I don't get it, but that's just me.
Well, he's always kind of been like that. He's always done Clubhouses. He's done Reddit Talks. I don't know if you remember Reddit Talks. They were like Reddit's Clubhouse. He's been on them for hours. He's on Discords. He's always, that's kind of why, in some ways, he's the podfather, because he does that. Like Gideon, Wallow, other folks like Nori, I don't think they're doing that. And he's actively getting feedback from the fans. And I think while it is like, whoa, why are you doing this? You look crazy. It could also be a sign of how much of a genius he is for doing that.
I think of it, and I might be wrong because I realize that some people don't think of it like this, but I think of it like if I was a professional bodybuilder. You work out.
Yeah.
But you don't like then go home and just work out a bunch more. Like the bodybuilder works out like a couple hours a day, really intense, like maybe an hour a day. And then you go and you nourish yourself. You take care of yourself. You eat good. You might do a little bit of cardio or whatever, but you spend the rest of the day taking care of yourself to prepare for your next workout. So that's how I think of it, is like when I go home from this, I'm watching content. I'm trying to learn. I'm watching shit on Netflix. I'm like doing whatever I feel is the most advantageous to me to be able to get back in the gym and do a great job. I don't feel like I'm getting better when I'm sitting there having a conversation with fans on an audio app. I actually don't even know what that would be like because I've never done it.
It's hella toxic, but I would say that in your bodybuilder analogy, like the Pumping Iron documentary, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the greatest dude, right? But in his spare time, he would bully Lou Ferrigno, right? Like he would just to make sure that he knew like to bully other people. And I think for the crazy ones that really take it serious, it manifests in certain ways. And I think it manifests in different ways for you. I'm not as familiar with what you do in your spare time. Like maybe you do something that looks weird to Joe and this looks weird to you.
Well, I find also that when I'm living more of a normal life, like when I'm in Brooklyn back in the day, I used to just...
Williamsburg, shout out.
Shout out Williamsburg. I used to just be riding my bike all the time, hanging out with people, talking all day about anything. All you do in New York, or my lifestyle that I was living, we're just riding around talking to each other all fucking day. You start talking to some random girl at the park. You're talking to some random dude who's selling candy, whatever. I mean, it's just like
drugs.
You just talk all day. And like, I guess I have kind of like lost sight of having that much of a reserve of conversation. But I don't know. I think that the way I'm thinking of it makes a little bit more sense to me. I like to be somewhat efficient with my words.
Yeah, he spends he's on there for like, I would say like almost 3 hours a night sometimes.
Jesus Christ.
Like crazy amounts.
To me, that's almost like a sickness that you require so much feedback and you're so in need of connection and you're apparently not getting enough of it from your friends and your romantic relationships that you like have to kind of constantly, like, I don't know how much of attention you paid to Lush, but that was ultimately what kind of
I like Lush.
Caused a lot of our breakup at a certain point. I feel like is that it was just like, he needed too much affirmation from the fans and from other people, and it led to him being a leaky ship on Reddit and Discord and whatnot.
I've always wondered like how it's tough with podcasting because you're like talking to people for hours and hours and you're not really their friend, right? Like I don't know if you feel like the people you do podcasts with are your friends. So I'm just going back by what you hint. I think you may have hinted at like the loneliness or something like that. Maybe that's a way of having authentic conversation. But I'm not here to psychoanalyze. Yeah.
No, but I feel like that is an underrepresented part of like the sacrifice of being a podcaster, is that if I spend my day having 8 hours worth of conversations with people that I don't really have a real relationship with, or that, you know, I'm really just talking to them for content, you become very, very good at having these superficial relationships. Meanwhile, like you just don't spend nearly as much time leaning into your real relationships. And it just kind of affects everybody a little bit. And I see people that I know who will go out to dinner with their friends when they're in town. And my brain never fucking works that way, because I think, let's do a podcast when you're in town.
That's heartbreaking.
It's fucked up, right?
Yeah.
But it ends up kind of fucking with you. Like, I've been friends with Vlad for all these years. I never like been out to dinner with Vlad. I probably should. It's like good human shit to do. But normally when we talk, it's content.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough place to be in, but I kind of maybe see that happening to me, where I think about something totally different because I have a YouTube channel now. You know, like I think about, I got to make a video about this. Something's happening, you know, and I see that happen. I can see why it happens. It's your job, it's your livelihood, and it's also a part of you forever.
Do you think Charlemagne has fallen off? Boom!
Obviously.
Viral question.
Obviously. I think it might be an engineered fall off, though. Like sometimes you don't want to be the guy. This guy's behind the scenes. He's connected to Kevin Hart. It's like, if you ever come across a relationship with somebody that could take you to another level, not saying that you're doing this, but like you might move differently. And Charlemagne has been to the top of the mountain. He's been kind of somebody that was so top of the mountain that Joe Budden had to acquiesce to him and kind of play the second in command at many times. So he's falling off, but he's still the man. Like he's not as entertaining though. And I think that's one thing. Like I think sometimes I listen to him and he sounds like I always call him like Shaq on the Celtics sometimes, where he was dominant at one point, but now he's not very much the guy I used to listen to and cut class for.
I was just watching a Traplo Ross video about the murder of Big Jook, who is Yo Gotti's brother, who was recently murdered in Memphis after a funeral. And in the video, they're sort of breaking down how, like, look, Young Dolph and then Black Youngsta and then Yo Gotti, they're all just like going on the Breakfast Club back to back to back, and like really like their beef and like that whole storyline was like playing out on the Breakfast Club. When's the last time you felt like that? Now, granted, a lot of this like street beef shit, there's obvious reasons that they don't want to touch it, and also you can kind of assume that the Breakfast Club didn't realize like how murderous that beef was / was going to become, you know? And not to say that that's the only thing that would make their channel have worth, but it does, feel like they're not necessarily really at the cusp of the hip hop conversation. But then, you know, Charlemagne signing talent, it doesn't feel like the Big Loon experiment went.
Are you cool with Big Loon?
I'm cool with him, but it doesn't feel like I don't know. Did Charlemagne like sign him to beef with Akademiks?
Well, I think Loon had a pre-existing catalog that was very valuable to Charlemagne at the time. I also think Loon was somebody that he probably confided in. This is me being observed, but I mean, I am right about the catalog that Loon had. He interviewed Rory Mal about the breakup. He interviewed the I Am Athlete guys about the breakup. So I think if you're someone who's maybe looking to hire somebody, if I come to you and say, hey, I interviewed Rory Mal, I interviewed Brandon Marshall about the breakup, that might look valuable. As to why his network isn't succeeding, maybe you don't have an eye for talent. Like I think you have an incredible eye for talent. Some of the people that I wouldn't say you made them into stars, but you put them in positions to become successful. Maybe Charlemagne don't got that. And he's not somebody who's of the podcasting industry, right? He's a radio guy who now is saying he likes podcasting, but he's not a podcaster to me. He's a radio host.
I mean, the thing with me is that No Jumper is mine, and it's all my money, and every single thing that I pay for or do goes right back to me. So I think about it a certain way. So if I was paying AD or T-Rail or whoever X amount of dollars, I was cognizant of that. It's not like I'm just playing around with somebody else's money. When you look at the Charlemagne thing, I mean, it's not like it's all his money, right? So like for him to sign Big Loon and give him a shot, it's not like he's investing his own capital. It's like when you're working with somebody else's capital, you're a lot more willing to take a long shot, you know? And like maybe if you think that this person has a 5 or a 10% chance of blowing up, then when you're playing with somebody else's money, then that seems like a shot worth taking. I mean, Big Loon, who, by the way, those Menace Material guys, they call him fucking Big Sloth.
Yeah. Those guys are. Shout out to AJ, J Nobles, and Tone Groove. They do anything.
Brutal. Sloth.
They don't play fair, man.
Dear God.
I don't want to beef with them.
But when he first interviewed me, he was going off on Akademiks the whole time. And this is before he signed to Charlemagne and before he did that Brilliant Idiots episode where he fully went in on Akademiks. And I mean, I kind of feel like that probably like cursed him a bit, because I don't think you can just come in the game and just go for the top dog or one of the top dogs and expect for it to work out for you. I don't think you could be a rapper and just, come up off of saying, fuck, I don't know, who should we go with?
Drake.
Fuck Drake, fuck Kendrick. It's like hard to imagine a successful rapper who comes out and their first act is saying, this is why Drake's trash.
Yeah.
It's not going to work.
Axe, yeah, especially Axe, because he's kind of like the pioneer of all of this. So I couldn't imagine dissing him. But Loon is, I think he's kind of like his niche is his niche. But when you try to put him on an elevated sphere, then it starts to look a little crazy. And Charlemagne's moving shaky as far as the radio industry and the podcast industry. I don't think some of the hires have panned out. He's making a bet, but I don't think he has the eye for talent like you or Joe. Like the idea that Joe knew this whole time Ish would be a great podcaster, which I truly believe he's really good at podcasting, even if he doesn't believe it.
I think if you go back in time, though, Charlemagne's had a lot of W's in terms of identifying talent. Whereas, though, right now, you might judge him a little differently,
like
perhaps. Schulz, Tax.
You think Tax was his?
I think there's, because he had him on that MTV show like a million fucking years ago. There's a bunch of people that Charlamagne has helped put on the game that I think that we're not likely to give him credit for because it was so long ago. But
Diesel Zamero.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of like right now, because like the Wild Wild West, if you were looking for talent in 2015, it was so much easier to like figure out people who were funny on Twitter or funny on YouTube or funny on Vine or whatever, and like try to turn them into podcasters. Whereas now, the vast majority of people who are going to take off as podcasters, we've already seen them be utilized, right?
Yeah. I want to go back to what you just said about the iHeart Black Effect thing. How authentic of a network do you think that is? Because Joe seems to act like it's like not a real network and that Charlemagne is running a shell company.
Who else is doing any kind of numbers on there?
Nobody.
Right. That's
And Joe's point is like Brilliant Idiots is on the Black Effect, right? So
right.
Like what is going on? And like it's not like Colin Cowherd, I think, runs the volume, which is through iHeart. And it's like, what is going on here? Is this just because after the civil unrest, right, a lot of companies were trying to pivot towards paying lip service to some type of diversity initiatives, and there was people hinting that is that what the Black Effect has become? But I don't know.
Damn, you just said it's an affirmative action network.
I mean,
affirmative action network is crazy.
Yeah, I'm about to get canceled, but nah. I think what it is that many people are doubting it. I don't know if it's an ad company. I don't know if they get the ads and they sign you, because there's podcasters like what's the comedian podcast that they're on, Wild 'N Out?
Oh, the 85 South
85
show?
South was on there. Earn Your Leisure was on there. And they're like these pre-existing IPs. They go there. So it's like, how does that work? If like, don't you have to start a IP from the bottom up if like you own something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I honestly have spent very little time
Looking at
it. I do feel like it's the same thing as like the Complex thing or whatever. It's like if you think that you're going to create this great business by finding a bunch of podcasts or curating a bunch of podcasts, what are you bringing to the table? If you have an intense ad sales division like Barstool, then for sure I could see it being valuable for you to sign with a network. But a lot of these things, I mean, like Dave Mays has been doing that Breakbeat Media, and he signed Don't Call Me White Girl, Mona, and he signed well, I guess he has Suge Knight, which is kind of weird because it's like done over the phone.
Great podcast.
But he also signed Funny Marco, who I believe has dipped out.
Left him.
He left him. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, it's like, what are you bringing to the table? It's not exactly easy to find sponsors that are dying to just put their logo all over random podcasts that haven't really like proven themselves yet. I don't know. It's like so many people seem optimistic about this as a business, and having done it for a while, I guess I would say I'm as optimistic. For me, it's more like literally building a friend group, a core group of dudes who actually are podcasting together. That is valuable to me and to the audience, is to actually see that cohesion. But the idea of me just like signing like podcasts that don't have any like overlap socially with the people who are already here, I think that's totally outlandish.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but that model is also problematic as well, the friendship model, because it doesn't seem sustainable for a long period of time. So
a lot of truth to that too.
Yeah, like you guys will inevitably break up at some point, and you got to be prepared for the breakup. And that's why I like doing this by myself.
And yeah, a lot of times I kind of zoom out and I'm like, me and Ack's careers are not so different, aside from the fact that he's really doubled down on himself. Everything's about himself. Very, very low overhead. He does all this content by himself. Me, I've really invested in trying to build out this network of different hosts. And sometimes I think to myself, well, like, fuck, should I just be like a YouTube essayist? Should I get like a team going of little writers helping me to like put together like, oh, let's talk about how this rapper fell off and let's talk about this. And like, you know, maybe that would be the smarter business move rather than me like really chasing after this idea of having all these co-hosts and stuff. But, you know, one thing, to give more credit to my op, Joe Budden, I think he said like, y'all are competing with me when I just do this for fun.
Okay.
Which we all do it for money as well. Yeah. But I like thinking about it that way because realistically, I don't have to do this. I feel driven to do this. And as soon as I don't want to do this, I assume I'll be not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
So, yeah. I always kind of thought that you could do that Rogan thing where you just, maybe your channel just becomes you interviewing people.
Yeah. I mean, I could do that, but
like episode 15,000 of, but
that is kind of what I'm doing. But then we also have like the group,
but I'm saying like
everything.
Downside. Like I don't want to talk about. I'm not. Yeah, that sounds crazy for me to suggest. But.
I mean, you know, I listen to Sam Harris a lot, and the other day he said that somebody recently turned him down to do a podcast, and that was the first time that had happened to him. That someone turned him down to be on his podcast.
Wow.
And I was just like, wow, must be nice. Because I've had conversations with Vlad where we would say, you know, he'll send out 100 DMs on Instagram and get like a handful of people that are down to do it.
Yeah.
And we consider that a pretty decent rate. You know, if you can get a 4 or 5% success rate, that's like if you talk to 100 girls and you fuck 5 of them, we're in business.
Yeah.
You're killing it.
I feel like doing the same thing you did to me during this interview. Will Andrew Schulz leave Charlemagne?
I mean, how well does the Brilliant Idiots do? That's
really well.
That's a podcast that if I had more time, I would definitely listen to it more. I do listen to it from time to time, but
I think it does well for it being a second option for both men.
Yeah, and I think it's smart for Andrew to keep 1 foot hip hop adjacent, you know? Mm-hmm. But, I mean, yeah, it's got to be a little bit of a weird decision given that Flagrant is fucking gigantic at this point.
Yeah, Andrew Schulz is kind of like, it's tough now to even delineate who was more impactful to his career, Charlemagne or Rogan. Like, it's like he's becoming...
I think Rogan for sure, right? Remember that clip of Charlemagne saying that...
I'm going to do a video about that.
That the Breakfast Club is just as big as Joe Rogan?
Very delusional.
Oh. That really made me feel like, damn, bro, you live in a bubble. You live in a bubble that is really shielding you from what's going on in the world out here.
Yeah, it would be like, I'm trying to think of a basketball player saying he's better than LeBron. Like, or like he's more impactful, but that's sports. But yeah, that was insane. And I think Schulz broke Charlemagne's heart. And it was interesting to see Schulz have to apologize and be like, you mean so much to me, Charlamagne. And that's how like crazy it got. But
we haven't seen what Joe Rogan's YouTube numbers look like in a few years, but I feel like he interviews like random dudes who are like not the biggest deal in the world, and the full interview would get like many millions of views.
Crazy.
You know, he's interviewing like Tony Hawk or something. Did he do Tony Hawk? Fuck. Did he do Tony Hawk? I don't remember.
Probably did.
But I think I remember like just noticing that at one point. I'm like, oh, he interviewed Tony Hawk and it's been out for 24 hours and it has 2.5 million views. And there's nobody hip hop wise that could touch that at all.
It's insane. Like he can interview a janitor that works at a museum and he'll probably get like tons of views. Like he's just the way he does things. And I think his YouTube exit created so many people because the algorithm was like, yo, we got to create. And I think Schulz may have filled the void.
I don't think of Joe Rogan as somebody who's thinking about the competition between podcasts. I think that he's like just so successful that he doesn't have to think about that at all. But you definitely probably are right that opened up a big space for more on YouTube. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I'm like, do you have any questions for me, man? I don't know.
What's next for Danny from the stop? Like, where could you see yourself taking this? Will you ever start a podcast? People are going to be commenting saying, Adam, you should hire Danny after this too.
Why would you say that?
I don't know. They say that about anybody that I have a good conversation with.
Oh, well, it's a good conversation. The thing is, like I was watching Mr. Beast on Flagrant, right? And he was trying to do the interview. He was being cool. But like halfway through it, he's like, so this is what you guys do, right? You do this long form stuff, right? And it was like, he was like going in his head and he noticed that this is crazy to sit down for 2 hours. What about my retention? What about the retention of the people watching? And I feel like a podcast, man, there's just so many people doing such long content. And I like being like small bites of content. I like taking what you guys do and maybe someday being a podcaster myself, but I want to tell stories about y'all breaking up. I want to do a podcast about, maybe I'll do a podcast about No Jumper breaking up one day and be like, the fall. What led these two men in different directions? AD and Ad, like that type of stuff. I want to do a narrative podcast.
Because, yeah, exactly. Narrative podcast. Because if you look at political or if you look at, you know, a little bit more lofty genres of podcasts, quite often their narrative, they put, you know, dozens or you know, hundreds of hours into a single episode in some cases. Now, granted, those are being like kind of held afloat by these big corporate sponsors and entities that own them and shit like that. But I mean, I do feel like there's probably a big future in that for hip hop. But actually, I guess it's played out through like the hip hop essayists, the YouTube essayists, right?
Exactly. Yeah, like I think my channel could kind of do that for like somebody who wants to know about the Joe Budden breakup with Rory Mal. But yeah, I don't know. There's a great story to tell about all of you guys. Like I said, there's one of the influences on my channel was Jim Miller. I don't know if you know Jim Miller, but he writes about SNL, right? Like he writes about the dynamic of SNL. He writes about the dynamic on HBO, and that's what I think I can be for hip hop. Right? I can write the dynamic between people, and if I become a personality and people like me, then that's money in the bank. But yeah.
You want to know one of my worst Joe Budden experiences that I don't think I've ever talked about on camera?
Obviously, I do.
Okay.
I'm gonna make a note of this.
When I got married in Italy, cost many hundreds of thousands of dollars for this wedding, right? But we decided, fuck it, we've been together 7 years at that point. We're going to do it. We're going to do this crazy ass wedding, invite her family, my family, bunch of friends, whatever. We go out there and we spent a significant amount of time creating a playlist for the DJ to play, mapping out a lot of our favorite songs throughout the years, songs that meant something to us, etc. And then when it finally comes time for the DJ to start playing music, he just starts playing a bunch of random shit. And some of it was like American pop music that I wasn't even familiar with. Some of it was like, you know, like oldies or Motown or whatever, but it would be like, you're playing this Marvin Gaye song. Like there's fucking, like we had 3 Marvin Gaye songs on the fucking playlist and they were all bangers and you're playing this weird ass, you know, it was like just very upsetting. And apparently the list just like didn't even exist by this point, or I don't know if like we just didn't even care enough at that point. We were a little drunk to like actually stand up to the DJ and like tell him like play these songs. Like, I mean, I don't even know if he would have had Wi-Fi to fucking download it, whatever, who knows. But either way, at a certain moment, and keep in mind, this is like 3 months, 2 months after the No Jumper breakup, in which I also had this, you know, little verbal war with Joe Budden, and I'm at my wedding, and they play Pump It Up.
They always Pump It Up is big. That's a big hit.
Yeah, but when you're in Italy,
you don't want to.
You kind of think maybe Pump It Up didn't make its way out here.
Why don't you IG live and then do the Drake like, there you go, Joey.
That would have been funny. I don't know.
Who else but Joey?
My mind wasn't there. I've also been banned on Instagram Live for like many years.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
That would have been pretty fucking funny. Yeah, Drake did bust that move. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, that's how Drake. He's like the kryptonite to Joe.
You think Drake will ever get the Joe Budden appearance?
Hell no. Drake got all the I don't know if to include you. I don't know if you vied for it, but he got all the podcasters on the string posting pictures of Drake like, yo, we gonna get a Drake. He's not gonna sit down with y'all. I think I have a better chance of getting a Drake interview. Why would he need to sit down? And the reason I say I have a better shot is because I don't think nobody has any real tangible shot.
I think if he had a podcast that he really fucked with, he would do it. He would definitely probably still want to control the edit. I could see him doing it, but I don't know. I don't think he fucks with Ack like that. I don't think he fucks with me like that, even though me and Ack both talk to him, but I don't think he fucks with us like that. I don't think he fucks with Joe like that. Definitely doesn't fuck with Charlemagne like that. Maybe somebody like Gillian Wallow, or even like, Drake would do some fly shit, like do something with Cam and Mace.
Possibly.
Because they're not like a threat in the same way. They're not in the rat race. They're kind of doing their own niche. But also it's kind of like, he can't go do the fucking Club Shay Shay thing because it already is like Cat Williams just solidified that shit. And like, a lot of celebrities have been lining up to do it after. But I feel like Drake would want to be the one doing the Cat Williams style appearance on a certain podcast. So I bet if I'm him, I've got that in my mind that I'm going to pick a certain podcast. He did tell me he was going to do No Jumper at one point. I think it was 2017 Instagram DM. Damn,
he was mad popping. I thought you were like 2008. He told me.
You want to know the thing though?
What?
I think the only reason he was asking me that was because he was picking out every single person that was close to X and getting in between and fucking with, because his beef with X was real. Remember he went to fucking Miami and shot the God's Plan video and gave out money to everybody. Like, just a coincidence, I'm in your city and I'm doing like all this stuff to make myself look like a great person. He does the song with Trippie Redd at that time when X and Trippie were super close. He gets in touch with me, follows me, tells me that he wants to do No Jumper. I mean, granted, maybe you
were a pawn in this war.
Maybe he was thinking about doing No Jumper at that point. Yeah. But I think that the primary reasoning might have been that he wanted to sort of get in there and be cool. That's a unique way of beefing, though. You only do nice stuff. You don't do anything negative. You only just fuck with, you do nice things. You give out money in his city, and then you become friends with all of his friends so that they cause potential turmoil. We never even got to that point. Me and X never had a conversation about it, I don't think, but
Drake is a scary dude. Like, as far as like just the things he can do, like, sleep with your like mom or something. Like he could do all types of things to you. Like the way he gets busy with the beef is like so unique to him and so different than like his predecessors that I don't think people can really even hang with him. And I know now it sounds like I'm trying to praise Drake, but I think I love his music. But the way he plays like is really unique to him.
You should go to Ice's neighborhood and hand out turkeys. And make a whole vlog. You'd be so triggered. And you can't really talk shit about it because it's like you're doing something good. That he probably, I don't know. I don't want to take that away from him if he's ever given out turkeys. But.
Because Ice, it was interesting. Like, it got to the point where I felt bad about what I was saying about Ice because he was so visibly triggered. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know if that ever happened to you where you talk about somebody and you see the effect and then you start to think like maybe I should like chill. But I learn.
Yeah, I've been there, but if you believe it, you believe it. End of the day, yeah. Danny, thank you so much for your time. Man. Everybody, go subscribe to his channel if you want to keep up to date on what's going on with all the pods out there. The Stop. You can just type the Stop, maybe Danny. The Stop space Danny, and you'll find it.
Twitter, the Stop TV, Instagram, the Stop TV. That's what you'll find. I don't like to promote too much, but
right. Yeah. But I mean, you get the podcast commentary channels that you deserve. So I say let's support more of the Stops and less of certain other entities that might not.
About. All right, cool.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, y'all. Peace.
Appreciate you, man. No Jumper, coolest podcast in the world. Check us out on YouTube, TikTok, Patreon, Instagram, etc. Like, comment, and subscribe. NoJumper.com if you want to support. And we will be putting Joe Budden's first album up here with the Whoops, the Plug Talk AVN Award, the Durkios, the Crip Mac 40, the Len of the Plug Fleshlight, and the Gay Crips orange sunglasses. Let's go.